I'm not how sure that intro music played out, but welcome one and all to the Defiant Takes Football show. I'm Max Dean. You can find me on Twitter at @themaxdean. You can find Brison Owens here at Brison Owens 16 on Twitter, and we are back. A little rusty, but we are back after much postponing of the show to do our official preseason picks and predictions for the entire 2023 NFL year. So, Bryson, first and foremost, how are you doing today, man?
I'm good. I'm glad football is finally back. It's been a long off season. Even if you're a fan of a team like myself, who your team didn't perform very well last year, you miss it. You miss watching football on Sundays,
Mm-hmm.
Thursdays, Mondays, whatever it is. So it feels good to finally have it back. It feels like the right time of year.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, we haven't been doing the show as much lately for various reasons, whether it's just family obligations, traveling, and this, that, and the other. So I'm excited to get back to it. I have been looking forward to this show, certainly because I think that it's the easiest show to look ahead. Everyone has the entire season ahead of them. There's a lot of optimism for really everybody involved. There's only a couple of teams where people really genuinely feel like they just have no chance at all whatsoever in terms of making it to the playoffs and then doing something. And I think that this is also a chance for us to kind of lay down our knowledge and talk about what we think is going to happen. And it's always a crapshoot, but this is probably what I did the best in throughout the entire season last year in regards to picks. You guys both did better than me in the pick segment for both regular season and postseason, but this is kind of where I made my bones. So I'm hoping to repeat as far as that goes. We we had we had some disappointments for sure.
Yeah,
I
tell me
think
about it.
yeah, if I remember right, and I will probably just keep this in my little book of things to bring up periodically throughout. But I do believe that you had the Denver Broncos making it to if not winning the Super Bowl this past year. So
I had us losing in the Walmart Bowl. I had us losing to the Rams in the Super Bowl. So it was about as
that's
bad
right.
a prediction as you could go.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's funny though. I mean, there's really only one way to find out how it all shakes out, and that is to actually watch it happen.
Yeah.
So let's put down our picks on the line and get this done. It's going to be a fairly long show. Last year we did it. We had a few more people involved in the actual live show itself. I have picks for Kyron Samuels, who does the show with me on every Monday, and I also have picks for Kyle Nishida, who does the weekly picks with both of us on Sunday morning. So while this show is kind of an unusual time in that it is at the last possible minute before we kick off the season opener tonight between the Chiefs and the Lions, normally we will be doing our picks show every Sunday live before the actual games start on Sunday. So I've got picks for them both to read off and predictions for the season. And then you and I will kind of talk through why we think they selected who they did. And then, of course, our picks as well. For those who may not know, I will just lay it out there. I'm a Jets fan. So if there is anything here which suggests some homerism, I'll accept that if necessary. And as you can see, Bryson is a Broncos fan as well. So same goes for him. Kyle's a Chargers fan, and Kyron is a Dolphins fan. So you may see things pop up or crop up periodically that suggest our allegiance to those. But I'm just spelling that out now for the sake of honesty and clarity. But all right, so first things first, we're going to jump into the division winners for the AFC, and then the teams that we think are going to be wild card representatives for the conference, and then we'll do the same for the NFC as well. Starting with the East, the first one that I'm going to read off is Kyle. So Kyle believes that the Buffalo Bills will be the AFC East representative in the playoffs. I mean, I don't think that's a shocker. They've won it for 4 years straight now. 2020,
I think
21,
so.
22.
Whenever
Maybe,
Brady left.
yeah. Yeah, 20. Yes. So I think back to 29. Actually, they missed the playoffs no, they didn't. They made it. Okay, yeah. All right, 4 years straight. So this would be no surprise for them to be the fifth consecutive year as the AFC East champions. The division has definitely gotten harder, gotten more challenging, but they still have very good quarterback, very good receiver, good defense overall. They are the proven commodity here, that's for sure. So I think that's probably all we need to say on the matter. Who are your selection for the AFC East?
I also have the Bills. I think it's a lot of what you just said. It's kind of been their division ever since, like we mentioned, Brady left. I mean, Josh Allen has taken a massive step after his first couple years in the league, where he's kind of teetering between just a really talented player who couldn't really put it all together. He's really put it all together the last couple of seasons. Part of that is great coaching. Part of that is when they got Stephon Diggs, that helps. Getting a receiver like that certainly helps your quarterback. But they have a really loaded roster. Their defense was still, despite the injuries they suffered last year, it was a really, really good defense. They were number 1 in the NFL in total yards allowed. I believe they were like top 5 in total points allowed. Like, they were an incredible defense last year. I am worried about the injuries already popping up. Von Miller is not going to be playing early on in the season, which is a huge blow to that defense. And they did have the whole like drama between Diggs and the organization, which threw things off. They haven't been able to build a run game this whole time with Allen. They haven't found a running back to build along with them, which worries me a little bit. But the team is just so talented, and that I still think they're well coached. I think Josh Allen's still playing really good football. So until they're kind of like the Chiefs, until someone proves they can knock them off, it's hard to go against that logic.
Yeah, I get it. I really truly get it. And for Kyron, he's going with the Bills as well. I think when you talk about the injury issues, as of right now, it's nothing crazy. They did have a lot of injuries over the past 2 years. Tre'Davious White, missing time in 2021, and then his 2022 season, not really. He missed some time, and then it wasn't really, full Tre'Davious that we've come to expect. So, this amount of time removed from the ACL, you normally would see a player get back to his full potential. Yeah. Corner is always tough because it's so athleticism reliant. But you would expect that. Their safeties are getting older and have both missed time. So even though they're healthy going into the season, something to be anxious about. Perhaps Von Miller missing time is not great. But I guess, you do want him for the postseason run. So if nothing else, you kind of look at it as maybe saving up for the big show, but it would be nice to have him throughout the year as well. I think offensively, they will be as good as they have ever been, right? They've added a first round pick to their skill group. You got another year of development from your second round pick last year, James Cook. And then really the only question for them is the offensive line. And then defensively, they're stout. I think Matt Milano is definitely the better of the 2 linebackers. I think they chose the right one to keep, but losing Tre'Davious White, replacing him, it doesn't necessarily is not necessarily the easiest thing to do because he is an impact player as well. So we'll see what they look like ultimately. And I say that just to kind of preface why I've selected the Jets here. I went back and forth on this a lot. I think, if you go down the list of units for the Jets versus the Bills, and then the Dolphins would be in this conversation as well. I think the Jets have and this isn't necessarily the why a team will win the division versus coming in second place in the division. But if you go down the list, the Jets have more groups, more units that I think come out on top versus the Bills across the board. And I think they have every opportunity to be the number 1 defense in the NFL this year. I think their D-line is better. I think their linebacker unit's better. I think their secondary is better. And that I'm not saying this is gospel, but it's just my opinion. I think their offensive line, if it's healthy, is better. and then their running back unit is better. And I think the quarterback and the receiver groups are really, maybe debatably tight ends because we haven't seen Dalton Kincaid actually play yet. I think there's a few spots that are in the Bills' favor, but I don't think that there's like huge gaps. I think they're well matched teams, and I think that whoever wins this Monday night in their season opener will have a leg up throughout the season because the other team's always going to be playing catch up. So I'm going to take the Jets. I think they're a little healthier right now, and so we'll see. But I'm going to take the Jets, and I think the Bills will give them just about everything that they can handle.
It's not going to be. It's going to be close. It's going to be within a game. They may even be tied by the end of the season. It could come down to tiebreakers with these two teams. I mean, they're pretty evenly matched teams, like you mentioned. The defensive side of the ball, I do agree. I think the Jets pretty much outperform the Bills on every unit, especially the secondary. I mean, the Jets may have the best secondary in football this year. Out of those two corners alone, I mean, they're incredible. The biggest worry I have with the Jets is new quarterback, new offensive coordinator, whole new thing going on there with a lot of young players on that side of the ball with the offensive line is the biggest question mark for me for the Jets offense, really. And you're playing against the Bills week 1. You go to the Cowboys. You have to play that defense. You play the Patriots, who I don't think the Patriots are going to be good, but they play a good defense no matter what. And then you play the Chiefs. So it's about as tough a 4-game opening schedule as it gets in the NFL. And so I think one of the biggest reasons I think the Bills take this division is they get off to a better start. I don't know if they win week 1 against the Jets, but the Jets have such a tough opening schedule that I think the Bills have a chance to jump out on a lead.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The Jets do run the gauntlet in the beginning part of the year, and I think that's why winning this game is important to them. I think, if you start the season with a win against the Bills, then you have a couple of games that you give up, whether it's against the Cowboys or the Chiefs or the Eagles, I think are early too. If you lose a couple of those games, as long as you've got that division game in your back pocket, I don't really expect the Jets to lose to the Patriots, and maybe that's naive of me, but I think at this point the Jets are a far better team, and maybe it won't be easy, but I think that'll happen. So you lose a couple of those games. I think as long as you got the division game, you can make up that ground later in the season. But yeah, it's going to be tough. They do need to come out of the first 6 games or so with a reasonable record if they do want to take it away. All right, let's move on to the AFC North. All right, so this is a tough division too. These are debatably the best 2 divisions in football. I think the AFC East and North are maybe the most competitive. I mean, we haven't talked about the Dolphins much yet. It seems like the Jets and the Bills are most people's favorites for the AFC East. And similarly, the AFC North has a number of different teams that I think have real opportunity to win. You look at the Bengals, they're the repeating champion. They've got a quarterback who, a lot of people consider to be in the top 2 or 3 in the NFL. They've got the skill players, they've put a lot of work into building a well-rounded team, and maybe they don't have superstars across the board, but they're good and they're led by a very good quarterback. The Ravens are a team that's been plagued by injuries lately. But of course, they have a former MVP at quarterback themselves. They've got the new coordinator to come in. They've invested in the skill group. They've always had good offensive line, good defense. You look at the Browns, and the Browns are a team that just on paper, they should be among the best teams in the NFL, and we just don't know what that looks like with a full off season for Deshaun Watson to be there and kind of put his mark on the offense as opposed to missing all that time and coming in late. So they're good. And then the Steelers are a team that is led by a coach who's literally never had a losing record, has been to the playoffs numerous times, and their quarterback second year. So I think this is, this is maybe the biggest toss-up. This might be the deepest division from number 1 to number 4 as well. So this one was hard for me to select as well. So Kyle went with the Baltimore Ravens, which I think is fine. I mean, you look at at their quarterback situation and you trust that, I think the biggest question is how does the skill room come together, right? Because they got Mark Andrews, J.K. Dobbins is, missed quite a bit of time, and he'll be their leading rusher more than likely. And then you got Odell Beckham Jr. coming in from quite a bit of time of being hurt. You've got Rashad Bateman, who you hope takes the next step, but he's been in the league for a couple of years, and we haven't seen that much yet. And then you've got the first-round pick, who I like a lot about, but also wonder how ready is he to contribute beyond schemed touches. So now, how do you feel about the Ravens as the pick here?
I think it's a perfectly fine pick. I don't think there's anything wrong with taking the Ravens. I think a lot of it depends on how much you can trust Lamar being healthy. I mean, the last 2 seasons, he's missed the last, I think it was like 4 or 5 games of each of the last 2 years. And the Ravens were like winning the division or right there with the Bengals when it happens. And then they immediately drop off because Lamar accounts for like half their offense. I mean, their points per game literally cut in half when Lamar Jackson misses time. I know, like you were saying, they've improved the weapons around Lamar, so maybe that helps a little bit with if Lamar misses time, whoever the backup quarterback is, they have better weapons to their disposal. But I think if Lamar can play a full season, I absolutely think they could win this division. I don't see any reason why they won't be competing for it at the very least. I think just, for me, it's the Lamar Jackson thing just scares me. One season is one thing, back-to-back years, leg injuries to both of them, and it really cost them their season both times. Kind of scares me with taking the Ravens.
It's understandable. So I've kind of hit the banner here prematurely, but for you, it's the Bengals. And why is it that you've selected the Bengals as your AFC North winner?
Well, personally, I think the Bengals have the best roster in the AFC, especially offensively. I mean, this team, I think they have the best wide receiver room in the AFC, maybe in the entire NFL. I mean, their top 3 receivers, they have two guys who could be legit number ones for almost any team in the NFL. And then Tyler Boyd, who's a really good number 3 or a solid number 2 on most teams. Like, this is a really good roster. They still have Joe Mixon, who, whether you love him or not, he's a good running back. They've improved the offensive line over the last couple of years for Joe, which is the big thing. I think people forget 2 years ago, they were the AFC representative in the Super Bowl. And I was looking it up. They have one player from that starting offensive line remaining from that Super Bowl team. And that's Jonah Williams, who's not even playing the same position. He's now right tackle instead of left tackle. And they brought in Orlando Brown, who, again, he's another one of those players, love him or not, he's a very good left tackle. So they've improved the weakest link of this offensive unit, which was the offensive line. And one of the sneaky things I think people don't always associate with the Bengals is that defense. They don't have a great pass defense. Their pass defense was pretty lowly ranked in terms of the NFL. I think they were in the bottom 10 for passing yards and interceptions. But they're the top 5. They're 7th in total yards last season. They were top 5 in points per game. They were top 5 in rushing defense. Like, they have a really good defense that will keep them in any game. And when you have a guy like Joe Burrow, who's probably my favorite quarterback in the NFL, when you have the weapons surrounding him like they do, I think that there's not going to be very many games where you're like, oh, the Bengals are outmatched in this one. They're going to be in every game, and I think that they're going to come out on top because I think I trust Joe more than anyone else in that division.
Yeah, so I tend to agree with you. I'm going to throw in Kyron's selection here, which is the Baltimore Ravens, and just touch on that briefly. I think he's very high on Todd Monken as the new offensive coordinator. And I know, I mean, look, it would be shocking if it doesn't look pretty different from what they've been in years past. I know that they'll still lean on Lamar as a rushing threat, but I think in terms of how heavily they rely on it, I think that will be different. I think they will structurally, they'll look different. I think they'll utilize receivers much more in the passing game than relying so heavily on tight ends. I think that they will be a little bit more spread out in terms of their formations. I don't think they're going to be so condensed as they were under Roman. So I think that, I understand that. I still think I just don't trust it quite as much as I trust the Bengals, I think stylistically they're a little bit less prone to injury. So understanding what you said earlier, Burrow, he can run around and make plays happen if he needs to, but I think he showed us last year that he can change his game and be a little bit more quick to get the ball out and save himself some of those hits. And then, the other thing is I just haven't seen a real dearth of pass rushers from the Ravens lately. So we need to see Odafe Owe really come into his own, or the kid that they drafted from Michigan, David Ajabo.
Oh, yeah.
And we haven't seen him at all last year because he came into the league hurt from his pre-draft offseason. And then Jadeveon Clowney, he's a good run defender, but he's never been a great pass rusher, certainly not later in his career. So that's why I've also gone with the Bengals, even though I think the Ravens are viable. I think you get one or two injuries here or there, they're suddenly the better team. I think for me, the scariest thing about the Bengals is that, their secondary isn't great. We're kind of relying on young player Cam Taylor-Britt to man up one corner side. Awuzie's been good, but corner play from non-superstars can be fairly up and down from season to season. Dax Hill is, again, a young player. Nick Scott is a young player. It's a very, very young secondary for the most part, and you don't know what that's going to look like. I think they have a good enough front seven that they'll never be absolutely, torched, but that is a secondary that should be able to hold up well when you have a lead. I don't know how it's going to look when they're in shootouts with the best of the best in the AFC, whether it be the Chiefs, whether it be the Bills, whether it be the Jets or Dolphins. So that's one thing that I'm a little bit worried about, but I think from top to bottom, they are the best and most proven. All right. So the AFC South is up next. So this is, honestly, I kind of figured that we'd all have the same pick for this, but we don't all have the same. So last year, the Jaguars did win the division. They have the ascending quarterback. They have a coach who's won a Super Bowl before and kind of had this team on a very positive trajectory leading into the playoffs and then winning a playoff game as well. I don't know how much better the team is this year based on personnel. I don't think they made any really big major moves aside from Calvin Ridley. Yeah. Aside from him, and that should make a big difference. But aside from that, defensively, offensively, they haven't made a ton of big moves because their first round pick at tackle is going to have to play immediately, and that kind of slides in and takes over for another tackle that they had. And I'm not sure that that's an immediate upgrade. In fact, I suspect very much that it's not. So I think really the reason that they are the expected winner for most people is just that the rest of the division is not that strong. Kyle took them, makes a lot of sense. And you expect that another offseason with this coach, another offseason of progression from Trevor Lawrence, that's kind of the expectation. So, who is your pick for the AFC South here?
I have the Jaguars as well. I think it's pretty much a lot of what you just mentioned. It's mostly because the rest of the division isn't great. I do like the Jaguars. I think they have a chance to be among the better of the AFC teams. The defense scares me a little bit. They weren't a very good defensive team at all really last year. I think a lot of people need to see that they're young. It's a young defense. They have a lot of talent on that side of the ball that just hasn't been proven yet. Trayvon Walker, specifically, the former number 1 overall pick, he needs to have a big year to help out that defense a lot. But I think it's a lot of the big thing for me with the Jaguars. You mentioned him a little bit ago. Calvin Ridley coming in is huge. I don't think people remember how good a receiver Calvin Ridley really is. He is a legitimate number 1 receiver, in my opinion. And you saw what Trevor Lawrence was able to do with Christian Kirk as his number 1 receiver, and then Zay Jones right after that, Evan Ingram getting heavily involved, Travis Etienne as the main running back. They did go out and they drafted Tank Bigsby, who I think is going to be a nice complementary running back to Etienne. They're different running backs, which helps out a lot. And then just another year, like you mentioned, under Doug Peterson. Peterson is one of my favorite coaches in the NFL. A couple of years ago, when the Broncos were looking for a head coach, I wanted them to hire Doug Peterson instead of Nathaniel Hackett. And I think it was pretty proven right that Peterson was the better choice with what he was able to do with the Jaguars last year. And then I think the big thing is Trevor Lawrence, to me, is an ascending superstar. I know he had a really bad rookie year. I think coaching was most of that for Trevor. You saw with an actual head coach who knew what he was doing. Trevor knew what he was doing. I think that they go together very well. My biggest concern with this team is the offensive line. You kind of hinted at it. If the rookie Anton Harrison, he's going to start at, I think, right tackle for them, replacing the Juwan Taylor, who's going to the Chiefs. I think that's going to be a big factor. If he can play well, that helps out a lot. But this offensive line worries me a little bit. But they're in a division where I don't think it's going to be a big deal. I don't think Trevor's going to get pressured too much inside the division. I think he's going to have an easy time winning the important division game. So that's why I have the Jags winning the AFC South.
So to play devil's advocate here briefly, in support of what Kyron has said, with the Titans, they are more proven in certain ways. Last year, they dealt with a ton of injuries, and they still had one of the better defenses in the NFL. I personally trust their head coach about as much as anybody else in the league at this point. Vrabel has done a phenomenal job in preparing them for game day, in executing and inspiration, and really all of the ways that you want. I think the scary part of this is their offensive line, their reliance on Derrick Henry, because when you just look at those two things, are they immediately going to come out as one of the worst teams in the NFL, the way that it's kind of generally talked about? I don't think so. I think they'll actually be decent off the bat. I think the problem is if you do have an issue with Derrick Henry, then you're relying on rookie Tajay Spears, who is definitely explosive, but I don't know if he can carry a team the way that Derrick Henry does, Rez, who really can. And then if that's the case and you start to rely on the passing game, what does that really look like? Ryan Tannehill is prone to getting hurt as well. So if you lose him, then you either have Malik Willis or Will Levis. And same issues that we saw last year, really. I think last year was the first time that Derrick Henry has really had injuries plague him at all. And he was mostly available. But at some point, some of this reliance on such a physical runner, it's got to be a dangerous predicament. And then Tannehill, kind of the same thing. And then once those guys are not potentially in the mix, then we could see a pretty rapid decline. The receiver group is still pretty questionable, even with the addition of DeAndre Hopkins. It does add a nice piece of stability there. And so I think if you just look at the big picture, assuming everybody's healthy, you can see a trajectory for them to potentially win the division. I don't disagree with that, but I'm not going to personally bank on that happening. I think they're a bit of a top-heavy team in terms of some of their biggest impact players, and I think if you pull the rug out from under some of those guys, then it's going to be rough, and that offensive line is tough. How do you feel about the selection of the Titans?
I don't think it's a horrible one. I think it's a lot like picking the Ravens to win the North. A lot of it depends on health. I think, like you were mentioning, Derrick Henry is key to that team. Like if Derrick Henry goes down, this team offensively is kind of useless. Like Ryan Tannehill's fine. He's a fine quarterback, but he's getting up there in age. He's not good enough to carry a team, especially with the weapons that they have and the offensive line, like you mentioned. It's crazy. A couple of years ago, and they had one of the better offensive lines in football, and now it's among one of the league's worst, and it's tough to watch. I don't think the Titans are going to be bad at all. I like you're saying, I think people are overreacting a little bit to what's going on there. I think they're still going to be a competitive football team, but you may see a point where you get later in the season and they're kind of pretty much out of the playoff race, and then you're going to see Will Levis and Malik Willis get some playing time to see what they have in those guys.
So I've also selected the Jaguars again. More often than not, I'm going to trust in the quarterback situation. If nothing else, if there isn't another set of circumstances that make it obvious that one team should be selected over another. Young ascending quarterback versus a guy who's well into his 30s and has been injured a number of times at this point, and who can operate well in a when things are going well around him. But I think I see much more of a likelihood that Trevor Lawrence actually elevates his offense versus just being a part of it. So that's why I've taken the Jaguars there. And their offensive line is questionable as well. I mean, Juwan Taylor was a good tackle, and he went in free agency. And then you've got the tackle that they paid last year, Cam Robinson, and he's suspended. So they've lost both starting tackles for at least the beginning part of the year. And then, that means that you have Walker Little on one side and Con Harrison on the right side. So that's a little bit scary. But I think that you just got to hope that they get by and they can win just enough games until they get Robinson back. And maybe Little will be better than we expect. We'll see.
Unfortunately, real quick with the offensive line trying to get by. How long did you mention Cam's suspended for?
I think it's 4 games, but I'd have to double check.
Well, unfortunately for them, I mean, each of these teams they're playing against have like one pass rusher you can kind of fear against. They play the Colts. They have DeForest Buckner, but he's going to be in the interior. He's not going to face the tackles as often.
For the most Chiefs, part,
yeah. The Chiefs, Chris Jones may not even be playing, so that kind of helps them out there a lot. Then the Texans, their best pass rushers, their rookie probably. Who knows what he's going to be like this early in the season for his NFL career. And then they play the Falcons, so they don't play the murderous row of pass rushers to start the season.
Yeah,
fortunately for
that's
the Jaguars.
True. Yeah, and it is 4 games. I just double checked, so okay. I think we can be fairly confident that they should get by all right there. And it's if you come out of that 2-2, then I think they're in a pretty good place. All right. So the AFC West, which is the division that last year we talked about being maybe one of the best, or if not the best in the NFL, it doesn't feel that way this year. I think that you still have maybe the single best team in the NFL in the division, but that depth that we perceived last year might not be there. And, full disclosure, I was not as high on the Broncos' chances going in. For a lot of reasons, some of which came true and some of which I did not anticipate. I didn't think that they would be quite as bad as they were. I thought maybe some of the expectations were a little over optimistic. And so we'll see if they turn that around this year. The cream of the crop is still the Kansas City Chiefs. Shocker, yep. Kyle selected them. I won't go on too much about it now because I'm going to give you the chance to talk about your selection as well. So I don't steal all the talking points here.
Well, I also have the Chiefs. I fell for it a little bit last year. I fell for both the hype of the Broncos, but then I also fell for like the whole Tyreek Hill leaving the Chiefs, how much of a factor that was going to play into them. Spoiler alert, it didn't. They were still the best team in football. I am still slightly more concerned about them coming to this one. The Chris Jones situation scares me. If he is out for as long as like he said he's willing to sit out, that's a long time without your best defensive player. And the numbers show when Chris Jones plays versus when he doesn't, that defense is very different. Like Chris Jones, it's kind of like what I mentioned earlier with Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson accounts for like half of that offensive production. Chris Jones accounts for like half of the defensive production. That's how impactful he is along that defensive line. And then we'll get into it later with the game tonight, but with Kelsey, he's got the bone bruise in his knee. It doesn't sound like it's a long-term thing, but that's going to, even if he does go tonight, it's going to bug him. One more hit of that knee and he's going to feel it. And then if Travis Kelsey misses any sort of time, Patrick Mahomes is missing his top 2 targets from last season. Juju left an off season and Travis might be out. So that's his 2 top targets from a year ago in terms of like amount of balls thrown their way and all. So that's a huge deal for Patrick. Now, at the end of the day, it is still Patrick Mahomes. It is still Andy Reid. It's their division, and I am operating this a lot with the Bengals until someone or the Bills until someone kind of proves they can knock them off. It's hard to just go against the norm with this team.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Kyron has selected the Chiefs, and a shocker, so have I. The you have the reigning MVP at quarterback, and it's like almost not even close, even though other guys have played very, very well. Mahomes is just so dominant when he's on, and I think you look at what he did in the playoffs last year, getting hurt, what he did in the Super Bowl. It's just I have endless confidence in both he and then Andy Reid as the coach. They're just too good of a pairing. Their offensive line is a good offensive line. I think it was one of the best in the NFL, and I think they honestly got better. I think Jawan Taylor is hands down easily an upgrade over Andrew Wiley, who they had playing for a lot of the year last year. There's really no question about that. And then on the other side, I don't know if Smith is an upgrade over Orlando Brown, but I don't think he's much of a downgrade. And I think he's better in the passing game is a pass protector, maybe not as good as at run blocking, but I think that any way you shake it, their offensive line is around as good as it was, if not better. Their skill guys, I don't think are worse than last year, at least not notably. Losing Travis Kelce would definitely hurt if that were to happen for any length of time. But as of now, it's not too severe of an injury. And then defensively, I know that Chris Jones not being there is something that is probably anxiety inducing for some fans. At the same time, they are going to be in so many advantageous situations as a defense that I think they will get through, and then they'll be in a position to take the division away. And ultimately, that falls on as much the other members of the AFC West as it does the Chiefs, because you look at the Chargers, they have distinct places where I can say, this is what I deem to be a problem. This is what I deem to be a problem throughout. And then the Broncos, similarly, as much as they did in the offseason to rectify some of the roster issues, there's still the immense question of what does Russell Wilson look like, and then you have the Raiders, and I think that they're, among the worst teams in the league this year. So I think that, despite the couple of places that we can point out as being a potential issue for the Chiefs, I don't think that anybody else is close enough to make me rethink my selection of them as the AFC West champion. All right, AFC wild cards. So we have three teams. We're just going to go through all three of them as we go. First off, I'm going to go and talk about Kyle's selections here. The Jets, the Bengals, the Chargers. Makes sense. He had the Ravens winning the AFC North, so the Bengals slide in here. That makes a lot of sense. The Jets, similarly. The Chargers are the third team for him, which again, if you're going to trust in anything, trust in the quarterback. They also don't have to go through an AFC North schedule. They don't have to go through an AFC East schedule. So that means that, even though we might feel good about the Dolphins, or we might feel good about the Browns or the Steelers even, they have more difficulty getting through the schedule that means Jets twice in the year, Bills twice in the year, or Bengals twice in the year, Ravens twice the year. So I think that, in terms of the best remaining teams, they have the most accessible path to wins. So those make a lot of sense to me. Who are your AFC wildcard teams?
So the Jets are my number one wildcard team. I think that, like I mentioned earlier with the Bills, they're going to be right there with the Bills for that division the entire year. I think it might just come down to a game or even a tiebreaker that decides that. This Jets team, loaded top to bottom, like you mentioned earlier. That defense is going to be incredible. I'm a little bit worried about the offensive line. I'm a little bit more worried than it seems you are about it. I I am a little bit concerned about their early start of the season, but I think they figure out eventually. I mean, you saw with Aaron last year. Aaron had trouble early with the young receivers in Green Bay. Towards the end of the year, he figured it out, and he and Watson especially really got it going at the end of the year. And now he has a guy in Garrett Wilson who's a lot better than anything Green Bay had last year. So I think he's going to figure it out quicker in New York than he did last year with the Packers. So I think they're going to fall just short of that division. I have the Chargers as the second wild card team. I think they also have a very good roster. The injuries is always a thing with them. Every year, it seems like one or two of their big players gets hurt. It's usually Keenan Allen, and it's usually Bosa. Those two have really struggled health-wise lately. I do think they did a great job of getting Quentin Johnston. I think he's going to be a very good wide receiver for them. I love Austin Eckler. The defense is very talented. I think it's a bit thin in some spots, but it's a very talented defense. And then I think their biggest thing was getting Kellen Moore. I think Kellen Moore is going to make this offense so much more explosive. They're going to take more shots downfield. They have Justin Herbert, who has one of the biggest arms in the NFL, and they didn't want him to throw the ball downfield last year. They wanted him to dump off to Eckler and hit Keenan Allen on short passes all game. He would take a shot every now and then to Mike Williams. I think you're going to see a lot more shots downfield with this Chargers offense. And then I do have the Broncos. And it's tough to say this after what happened last year, but I think you're going to see a stark difference with the way Sean Payton runs things versus the way it was run last year with this coaching staff. I think Sean Payton's going to get Russell Wilson to be more like Russell Wilson was in Seattle. He's going to run more. I think that's a big thing. That was like Sean's biggest goal the second he got to Denver is he wanted Russ to run around more. The defense is still going to be good. It was a top 10 defense last year. I think in spots, they're better on defense than they were a year ago. Injuries already starting to pile up. They lost Tim Patrick. Jerry Jeudy, it sounds like he might be able to play week 1, but he's already starting the season off with an injury. They did upgrade the offensive line. They went out and got Mike McGlinchey and Ben Powers, which I think is huge for this team. I don't think they're good enough to win enough games to change people's opinions on them fully. But I do think they're going to be good enough. They get it off to a decent start too. I mean, they get the Raiders week 1, they get the Commanders week 2, Dolphins who are going to be good, but they get the Dolphins and the Bears. So their first 4 games, you could see them going 3-1 in those games, which will help out a lot. The Broncos are the one I'm the least confident in, but I think Sean Payton's going to get it figured out. I think he's going to get this offense where it needs to be, and they're going to find ways to win somewhere around 9 to 10 games and sneak in.
Yeah, I think it's conceivable. I'm so without harping on Russell Wilson, last year was really bad, and
it was really
bad. I'm not a big believer in him making a major turnaround at this point in his career, and so I don't anticipate it happening. But just assuming that he does, some of the other concerns I have are the right side of the offensive line. I know Balls has been up and down. He's had injuries, but he's your best offensive lineman when healthy. Ben Powers was a nice signing. But for me, from the right side over, from the center over to right tackle, I'm not super optimistic that that's really good. We'll see. You could maybe Quinn Miners, he makes a major step forward. I think Lloyd Cushenberry would have to have a really big step forward. That's kind of an anxiety-inducing position for me. And then McGlinchey is, regardless of whether you like the amount of money that they spend on him or not, he's still clearly an improvement at the position over what they had last year. And then defensively, they're pretty well loaded. Losing Bradley Chubb doesn't really help, but Randy Gregory's a good pass rusher. Baron Browning is a very promising player. And even though he's on PUP right now, I think by the time it's all said and done, he could be making a case to be among the stars by the end of the league. And the rest of their front 7 is pretty good. And then in the secondary, they've got really nice players led by Patrick Surtain and Justin Simmons. So I think that, if anything, is going to be what keeps them in games more than anything. And then it really just is a question of how much Sean Payton can turn around that offense and how big of a step back forward step backward that Russell Wilson can make. So I'm not going to pick them, but I can see the argument for them, certainly. In terms of Kyron's choices, he has the Dolphins, the Bengals, and the Jaguars. Bengals, Jaguars, we've talked a lot about. It make a lot of sense if they don't win their respective divisions, then they can certainly get in the wild card. The Dolphins are the other team that none of us seem to have selected. And the thing about the Dolphins is that their offensive line, it might not even be good. And just with everybody healthy. And then if they lose Teron Armstead, it's just not good. It's an outright bad offensive line. And so they have the skill guys. I mean, they have the receivers. You know, if it's not the Bengals, they probably have the second best receiving group in the NFL, or the best. The tight ends are not really great, but I think you can get by without great tight end play and be a good team. Running backs are explosive, fast, if nothing else. And defensively, you would expect them to take a step forward because even last year, they underperformed versus their talent level substantially, I felt. So losing Jalen Ramsey, that hurts for sure. And I know it's not the whole season, but at this point, you don't even know how it's going to be. You know, it'd be a major assumption for them to get him and have him just come back and be the guy right away.
Even if he comes back like halfway through the season in the AFC, halfway through your season, missing Jalen Ramsey could be the deciding factor. Like this conference is too loaded to miss talent like that for that long and just make up for it in the back half of the season.
Yeah, and I think there is an opportunity for some of their pass rushers to have big seasons. Bradley Chubb, you know, you can talk about it as a Broncos fan. You know, a lot of promise, some good games, never truly stepped into that superstardom tier. And, you know, with a first round pick, his compensation and the contract that he got, you kind of need that to justify it. Jalen Phillips is a guy that I'm high on, and he absolutely could step up and be their best pass rusher. And as good as Christian Wilkins is, he is an elite run stopper. I wouldn't necessarily say he's a massive pass rusher. So they've got the bodies up front to be good, but we're talking about needing to match up against the Bills, needing to match up against the Chiefs and the Jets and the Bengals. And who is it? Who are you coming out on top of? And then obviously the other elephant in the room, which we haven't talked about up to this point, is Tua Tagovailoa's health and him being able to stay healthy. And, you know, I think optimistically, the chances of him missing the same amount of time that he did last year, I guess you can talk about just like percentages of likelihood, and maybe he's in there more, but it's still something that I would be anxious about. And, you know, I think they'll be good. I think they'll be a major challenge to anybody who has to go through them. And I think they'll have a solid record. And hey, maybe we'll get 3 teams from the AFC East. It's possible, but I always have a hard time choosing 3 teams from the same division to get to the playoffs, just because they will rob wins from each other. They will.
It's tough.
So again, I can see the pathway, but with that as my sort of standing rule, if I'm as confident in the Bills and Jets as I am, then I just have a hard time picking the Dolphins to make it. And for me, that probably kind of lays out my picks pretty clearly, but I have the Bills, the Chargers, and the Ravens. So pretty much the other teams, the Ravens and the Bills that people selected to win the division, I picked them. And then the Chargers, like I talked about, I'm going to trust the quarterback, you know, who may very well have an MVP caliber season himself. So that leads us through the AFC. Been kind of long so far. Maybe we can speed it up just a touch, but either way, we knew it's going to be a long show regardless. All right. So moving on to the NFC, we have the East first and foremost. I don't know if we have to spend a ton of time on this because, you know, we have the defending NFC champions in the NFC East, and they have not suffered any substantial losses to their roster. Offensively, Isaac Samalo, who they've replaced with second-round pick Cam Jurgens. So even if he's not as good, we expect it to be solid replacement.
Yeah.
And then same thing on the other side. They lost Javon Hargrave, and now Javon Hargrave is a very good player. But the addition of Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis waiting in the wings, they have some. Maybe it's not a guarantee, but they've given themselves every opportunity to replace that production realistically. So Kyle has them as the winner of the NFC East, and it's no shocker. What about you?
Okay, I have them winning the division as well. The one crazy fact I saw when doing research for this team in this division is there hasn't been a back-to-back winner of it in like 20 years. I think it was like 2004 was the last time there was a back-to-back winner of this division. So for those of you who follow trends, maybe that scares you a little bit, but I think this roster is too loaded to follow that. I think I mentioned earlier, I think the Bengals have the best roster in the AFC. I think the Eagles have the best roster in the entire NFL. I mean, the one position group that kind of scares me is the safety spot. They did lose CJ Gardner-Johnson, who is huge for them. They're going to rely on younger safeties. But when you have the pass rush and the defensive line like they have, I think it's going to help them out so much, and it's going to make those safeties look better than they actually are because, the pass rush is going to get to the quarterback too quickly for it to really matter, in my opinion. And then, they moved on from their running back room. People have questions about, but I think it's a solid running back room. I think, did you see that on their depth chart, they listed like all four of them as starters? They didn't list like an actual starter. It's really funny to me. But then even if their running back room just does dip in production a little bit, you have Jalen Hurts right there to help with that kind of rushing production. And Jalen Hurts is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, in my opinion. They have great weapons around him. I think Nick Sirianni is a good coach. I'm curious to see what this team looks like with two new coordinators. So that's going to be fascinating. But I think this team is it's too loaded to not pick them.
Yeah, I agree. And if you're looking to pick holes defensively, they lost a couple of guys that aren't as big as Javon Hargrave, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who's a good player, but not, superstar level. They also lost Edwards, the linebacker, to the Bears in free agency as well. So, if you want to point at some potential holes, those would probably be them. But they still have high quality players at the corner spots. They've still got guys on the defensive line. They've got Zach Cunningham, who's been a decent enough to even very good run stopper throughout his career. And then Nakobe Dean, who you invested in last year. A lot of people viewed him as a potential first-round pick, if not for the injury. Yeah. And, you have nothing here is a guarantee, but certainly these are all viable pathways to have it, once again, a very good defense. And then the offense should lead the way. And they might not lead the NFL in sacks again, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to have a very good year in themselves. So I think that even though there are good teams in the NFC East, aside from the Eagles, I just don't see enough of a drop-off anywhere that's a huge red flag for me in terms of this team taking a major step back. So I agree with you guys that the Eagles are by far the most likely winner for this division. So let's move on to the NFC North. Now, we have a number of different teams. This might be the division where we have the most variety in terms of outright winners. So it'll give us a chance to kind of talk through each team as we go. So first off, we have Kyle with the Minnesota Vikings. Vikings won the division last year. The Vikings have some star players for sure. They've got Justin Jefferson, who may be the best wide receiver in the NFL. They have the tight end Hawkinson. And he's a very good player as well. I don't know how much of a superstar you'd call him. Alexander Madison's a good player. They've got some good tackle play. The interior of their offensive line maybe a little bit more of a question. And then their defense last year was absolutely awful. So for them to have brought in a new defensive coordinator made a lot of sense, and you can probably expect an improvement there just based on that alone. They've also lost some guys. Zadarius Smith moved on, and then Patrick Peterson, for whatever you want to say about how good he was last year, he also moved on, and that's a veteran presence. So they've got talent. I actually really like their coaching staff. Their head coach in particular, I'm very high on the trajectory of Kevin O'Connell as a play caller and as a head coach. I think that they are aware that their roster isn't what they wanted it to be, and they ended up winning more games last year. Competitive rebuild, I think, is what they call it. They ended up winning more games last year than maybe than I would have expected. I think their roster is actually worse overall this year. I don't think it's wildly worse, but I think that they're going to regress to the mean a little bit in terms of some of the situations where they're winning all these close games. I think that I don't think they're going to be outright bad, but I do think that they will regress just enough that they're not going to be the winner here. But if you are pointing to why they would win, I think reliability at the quarterback position, superstar at the playmaker position, and the head coach who's done a really nice job and you trust to continue ascending. So I think that's what you point to, but I just feel like there's a few too many things to point to say why they wouldn't win. But what do you think about the Vikings here?
I don't hate the pick. I think people are overreacting a little bit. I know the Vikings are like everyone's big team to take a huge step back. I think really most of that is, you mentioned it a little bit, is the close game thing. They went undefeated in one-score games. That's unheard of. They're not going to go undefeated in one-score games again. They're going to lose some of those. I think that's the biggest reason I have them dropping off a little bit. I do like the draft of Addison. I think he is going to be a very solid number 2 receiver for them right out of the gates. I like Hawkinson. I love Jefferson. The offensive line scares me a little bit, especially along the interior, like you mentioned. The biggest worry for me on that offense is they're going to rely so heavily on Alexander Mattison, who's never rushed for more than 500 yards in his career. This is going to be his 5th year, I think, in the NFL, and he has never, or 4th year, he's never broken 500 yards. You're moving on from Cook, multiple-time Pro Bowler, multiple-time 1,000-yard rusher, and you're going to that, and that kind of scares me a little bit. But I do think the Vikings, given in this division, have a chance to win it. I don't think it's a terrible pick at all.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that if you look at the defense, I don't really see much in the way of star players at this point. So who's leading the way there? I see a bunch of fine players, but then, at what point when you need a big play, who is going to be providing that? Harrison Smith at this point in his career, he's a good player, but he's well into his 30s. Danielle Hunter has been a star pass rusher, but again, at this point in his career, after so many injuries, I don't know if I want to put that on him, right?
Yeah.
And then aside from that, you just got a bunch of young guys, and then, kind of, I don't like to use mediocre in the negative sense, but they are middling in terms of NFL starters. Fine to have them, but if you don't have those star guys, yeah. So that being said, who is your selection for the NFC North?
I have the Lions winning this division, which is just wild to say. I mean, they haven't won the division in over 30 years, and they're the favorites coming into the season, which is just insane. They were my favorite pick last year for wins. I think that last year they were set at like 5.5 wins, 6.5 wins, whatever it was, coming into the season. They were my favorite over on wins last year, and I love them to win this division. They had an elite offense last year. I mean, they were top 5 in pretty much every category. Jared Goff was incredible. That offensive line is absurd. If there's an offensive line that can give Philadelphia a run for its money, Detroit's probably up there. They have such a good offensive line. Dan Campbell, I love Dan Campbell. I think he is the right coach for that team. I don't know if Dan Campbell is the right coach for every team, but I think he's the right coach for that team and their culture. And their big thing, they were a terrible defense last year. That was their big thing. They were one of the worst defenses in the NFL. I think they did about as good a job as anyone this offseason of improving that. I mean, they went out and got CJ Gardner-Johnson, he was tied for the NFL lead in interceptions and missed 5 games while doing it. They signed Cameron Sutton, who's a very good corner. They signed Emmanuel Mosley, very good corner. He's going to be, it seems like, available to play too, which is huge. I like their draft. I know a lot of people freaked out a little bit at the loss of Jamal Williams, and they traded DeAndre Swift, so that really good run game that they had last year is gone from last year. But David Montgomery is a solid running back. I love the pick of Jahmyr Gibbs. He looks incredible. He's going to be able to do things that neither Swift or Jamal Williams could do for them, which is exciting. And I trust the trajectory the team was on. I think the defense is going to be better than it was last year. It's still going to be a very, very good offense. And in this division, Goff being arguably the best quarterback, maybe second best to Cousins, I think that's good enough with the rest of this team to win that division.
All right, so I'm going to circle back to the Lions here in a minute, but first I'm going to talk about Kyron's pick here of the Green Bay Packers, which honestly, again, I'm not at issue with. Personally, I think they're the second best team in the division, not the first, but when you look at their defense, they might have the best defense in the NFC North, right?
Yeah.
They have pass rushers. We've got Rashawn Gary, who's back. They've got a first-round pick from last year, who you can expect to take a step forward, and Devontae Wyatt, or you hope to take a step forward. He was very good at Georgia. Then you've got their first-round pick this year, who I really, really like, Lucas Van Ness. So they've got these front 7 pass rushers who I'm very high on, and then you look at the secondary, and maybe they don't have like all pro safety play, but they do have Jair Alexander, who's one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. They have Eric Stokes, who is, I believe, coming back from PUP.
I believe so, yeah.
Double check. Yeah, so I think, he's on the PUP list for now, but they also have Rasul Douglas on the other side. They've got Rudy Ford in the secondary as well. They've got Preston Smith. They've got Kingsley Enagbare, who was a high pick for them last year. Kenny Clark. They've got up front. So this team has a ton of players, and I think they'll be much better than they were last year because Jair Alexander is going to be available for more of the time. And then offensively, they have a good offensive line, and they have some good running backs. And then it's really just a question of how is Jordan Love. And I'm fine with the hypothetical that he is decent, but I also suspect that even if he becomes a very good player, it takes a year. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, even though he wasn't Aaron Rodgers his first year as a starter, right?
Yeah.
And so
they went like 6-10.
Exactly. So I think, even if Love isn't amazing right away, that's fine. I have no issue or criticism of that, but I suspect that's likely the case, is that he's not going to elevate this team right away. And I think they could use a year of evaluating the offense, and then they can maybe add a couple more pieces to it next year, and then they might be in a prime position to retake the division. But I think, at least for now, I see the pathway in which it's viable, but it's not necessarily who I would select. And on that note, I've also picked the Lions to win the division. Like you, I think offensively speaking, they're very well constructed. They kept their offensive coordinator from last year, so we shouldn't expect things to change. They have all of their good offensive linemen back. They're one of the better offensive lines in the NFL. I don't think that I think that they see what I saw, in that their run game last year was not necessarily a product of Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift. I think it was a product more so of the construction of the offense and the offensive line. So I'm not really concerned about replacing Montgomery and Gibbs or using those players to replace who they lost. I think defensively they've taken a major step forward in what they've added. Now, I don't know if that will all come together immediately and be perfect, but I do know that I love the addition of Jack Campbell, and I really like the addition of Brian Branch as well. I think that their cornerback situation is not stellar, but it's viable, and that's better than what they had last year. And then you add C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Brian Branch at those nickel spots, however they end up fully deploying them throughout the year. That's an improvement, hands down. And then Kirby Joseph and Tracy Walker are fine safeties, with Kirby Joseph having upside as a high pick too. So I think everything that they had last year, they bring back and have gotten better. And I don't think anybody else in this division also has done that, aside from maybe the Bears, but the Bears were so bad that I don't think an improvement is enough to elevate them to a division winner. So that's it for the NFC North. Let's hit the South now. All right. So the NFC South is one of those teams, or one of those divisions where we've got a number of teams that I don't think anybody feels really good about the NFC South. Let's be honest. I don't think anybody suspects that there's going to be a deep run in the playoffs from an NFC South team. I don't think anyone suspects, for the most part. Don't want to talk for everybody, but I don't think anyone's really penciling in an NFC South team to make the Super Bowl, right?
Nope.
And that kind of tells you everything that you need to know. But out of the teams that are there, somebody has to win. Somebody has to go to the playoffs. So that being said, there are really two teams which I think are viable, and one of them is who Kyle has selected, and that is the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons are a team that is loaded with playmakers. They have improved their defense. They're probably healthier on defense than they've been. They had a very good run game last year, something for which Arthur Smith's very well known for designing and calling. And they are also trotting out a quarterback who has a lot of questions. Third-round pick out of Cincinnati last year. Played a little bit, to no one's surprise, didn't look awesome, but they were very confident in him, at least to the point where they did not draft any more high-profile player to compete with him. They didn't bring in any big-time quarterback to compete with him or push him for that spot. It seemed like pretty early on, they were like, this is our guy. You know, Taylor Heineke, say what you want about him, but he's not exactly breaking down the door for the starting position against anybody with some talent. So
he's a backup.
And so that implies that Desmond Ridder is their starter, and they've operated that way. And coming out of camp, it's absolutely the case. So the question is just, what does he do in the big moments? What does he do when maybe they are against one of the better run defenses in the NFL and they've got to throw the ball? Are Kyle Pitts and Drake London, are they enough? Are they enough to just like get them the ball and let them do all the work? You know, is Bijan Robinson then become one of the top target in the passing game if necessary and just make him do all the work? You know, we'll see. So I see why you like him. I think they're kind of the popular pick. I think that they are missing pass rushers, and then I think they're missing enough at quarterback to be really confident about that. How do you feel about the Falcons as the division winner?
So I'm kind of with you. The Falcons are one of the two teams I see realistically winning it. I do like their decision to go all in on Desmond Ridder. I think they're operating with, because they're in this division, they know that they're probably not, even if they win it, going very far in it. I think they're operating with, throw Desmond Ridder out there, see what he is. He's a third-round pick, so they can't have too high of expectations for this guy right away. But this is a loaded draft class and quarterback next year, so if he underperforms, and if Desmond Ridder isn't the quarterback they thought he is, there's a realistic chance they could get one in the next draft who's probably better than him. And they have that loaded roster around him, like you mentioned. I do think Desmond Ridder, you know, he's fine. I think I saw that stat. He threw the most passes last season without throwing a pick. I think it was something weird like that. Like, he didn't throw an interception last year. He just kind of did his job. He wasn't great. I do like the rest of the team. I like Arthur Smith a lot. I think he's a very, very good coach. I think they're going to put a scheme around Desmond to make it easy for him, specifically in the run game with Bijan and Algier. But I don't trust Ritter enough to take them in this division with the rest of the holes that they have.
Yeah, the thing that I wonder is if they aren't good enough and they are in position to draft a quarterback, how many seasons deep are we with Arthur Smith? Do they decide to go in another direction? Do they want to let him in his fourth season sign up for a rookie quarterback? I don't know how they'll feel about it. So, they need to show something this year. They are kind of putting themselves out there. I don't think you can miss the playoffs for 3 straight seasons and really get another shot. So they've got to at least be very close. There's got to be something that they can hang their hat on when the season's said and done. So who is your selection for the division winner?
I have the Saints winning it. I think people forget because last year was kind of a mess for them. That defense is very, very good. It's a bit top heavy. They're not very deep, and a lot of that is the things they've done in the cap over the last few years. And so they're not very deep on defense, but their top line, their top level of the defense is very, very good. Derek Carr, say what you want about him, he's probably the best quarterback in this division. Depending on what Bryce Young looks like as a rookie, Desmond Ritter his first year, probably no one's thinking about that with Baker. But Carr is probably the best quarterback in this division. I like a lot of the stuff they have around him. I'm a big Olave fan. They did go out and get Jamal Williams for that run game. And then in a few weeks, Alvin Kamara will come back. So I don't love the coaching staff, and I don't like their depth very much. But in this division, I think a guy like Derek Carr, with that defense that the Saints had and the weapons that Carr has to his disposal, is good enough to win enough games in this division to win it. Again, not anticipating a deep playoff run with this team, but I think they're good enough to win 9 games, 8, maybe even 8 games is good enough for this division the way it looks right now. And then just kind of see what they do from there. I'm not in love with this team, but it's the best in my opinion.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. They might not be the best in any single place. I mean, they have good players across the board, a lot of aging players across the board, a lot of players who've been injured across the board. And that's why, I don't think that they maybe stack up with other high quality teams in the NFL, but certainly they have the most stable roster in terms of the smattering of very good players, the very experienced players, and then you throw in their Derek Carr being sort of the most trustworthy quarterback in the division. And I am a big fan of Young in Carolina. I think he was the correct first overall pick, but I don't know what that looks like year one. I think they have some questions with the offensive line, which I didn't even anticipate as much. I thought they would be a much better offensive line based on what they had done last year. So I was a little bit questionable on what that'll look like now. And then you look at the Buccaneers, like you said, and it's really no question in my opinion. And then Ritter is a major question mark as well. So just the most trustworthy quarterback. It's a system that's been in place. All the players know what they're supposed to do. They know how to play. The offensive line is good. Trevor Penning is definitely a question at left tackle for sure, but the rest of the offensive line looks pretty solid. Good defense with high quality players across the board. So I don't think that they're going to blow anyone away, but I think they'll be good enough that they will clean up in most of their division games. So I've got Kyron's pick there is also the Saints. Mine is also the Saints. So I think that's probably enough time spent on that. And that will take us to our final division, 8 of 8. All right, the NFC West. The NFC West last year featured 2 teams going to the playoffs. One was a team that most people thought would be good, although there were question marks regarding Trey Lance. Another is a team that a lot of people thought would be quite bad, and that was the Seahawks, who ended up surprising a lot of people, myself included. Then we had two teams that massively disappointed. The Super Bowl champions had a major, massive, huge step back. They lost a lot of talent this past offseason as well. Then the Cardinals made it to the playoffs and then had a pretty poor start to the year, which I think a lot of people did anticipate. I did not expect them to be very good. And then the injury to Kyler Murray kind of just solidified everything and really just, took it to a new level of disappointment, unfortunately. And so I think a lot of people look at the two teams that went last year and are pretty confident in the two of them. So which of them did Kyle select? He took the 49ers. Yep. So fair enough. Very good team. Questions at quarterback. I mean, maybe you don't love Brock Purdy, but they did it with him last year. So, you would expect them to be at least around that good. They've lost some offensive line talent, Mike McGlinchey, and they are currently in a holdout with Nick Bosa, but they did bring in Javon Hargrave, who we just talked about as being a very, very good player. So I don't anticipate any major drop-off for their offensive line or defensive line. And the rest of the team is just as good as it was. So you look across the board, they're just stacked everywhere except for quarterback, and they seem to be just fine there last year. So how much different can we expect? What about you, Brison?
I also have the Niners winning. Quick note: I don't think they're actually in the holdout with Bosa anymore. They did extend him. I don't know if you saw that.
When did I? Oh, I just missed that.
Yeah, they extended him late yesterday. I think it was a 5-year, $170 million deal, 122 guaranteed. So he should be back. I don't know if he'll play this week since he missed the whole time. I would anticipate if he's healthy, he'll play. But he should be coming back. I also have the 49ers, though. I know that quarterback is their biggest question mark, but if Brock Purdy is healthy enough to play, I think he's more than good enough to win this division. I know a lot of people counted him as such a cool story. He was Mr. Irrelevant. Look at him playing really well in this Niners system. He threw 13 touchdowns to 4 interceptions in the regular season in 5 games. He was more than just serviceable. He was really good in this offense. And I think I think the big thing with him is he knows how to run what Kyle wants. Kyle Shanahan's offense is very particular. You need to be an accurate quarterback. He completed 67% of his throws. So obviously he's a very accurate thrower of the football. He's not dynamic. He's not going to wow people with his athleticism or his big arm. But I think he does exactly what the Niners need him to do. And the rest of this roster is loaded, like you mentioned. I think they are one team that can give Philly a run for their money in terms of just overall talent on the roster. Quarterback is the biggest drop-off there, and some other positions. There's a couple other positions where Philly's clearly better, but the Niners are, in my opinion, the second best team in this conference. I think if Brock Purdy's good to go, I don't see any reason why they can't win the division. I do think Seattle's going to compete, but I think Geno Smith has a bit of a drop-off. I don't think he's going to be quite as amazing as he was last year. This defense last year wasn't great, especially in the run game. I don't think they got better that much on that side of the ball. So that worries me a little bit. But I think Seattle's going to compete, but I think the Niners are clearly the better team, in my opinion.
So on the note of the Seahawks, Kyron has selected them, and I can understand why. I mean, most of the time we talk about the best quarterback being the favorite to win a division, but it's just such an unusual situation where you've got this guy who was not particularly good in the opportunities that he did get for such a long part of his career, and then when he finally gets this opportunity, he just kind of runs away with it. And so, I don't think that we should anticipate him taking a huge step back, but at the same time, it's how can we realistically expect this guy who just came out of nowhere to be as good as he was last year? So it's a tough question. I think they got lucky in the sense that just about every possible thing that could have gone right went right for them last year. All of their rookies performing pretty well. I think, you look at their offensive line, and assuming those guys take a small step forward, at least not a step back. That's a solid unit. They've drafted Jackson Smith and Jigba, which I think was a really nice pick for them.
Yep.
And just kind of anticipating, maybe a little bit of a drop off in terms of production from some of their older guys, or one older receiver in particular. And it just fills up a place on the field that I don't think was really heavily utilized or utilized to the best. Because you have DK Metcalf, who's more so a down the field threat than anything, big body. Then you've got Tyler Lockett, who at this point in your career, I don't know how much you want him going over the middle and taking hits. And so he's kind of a down the field sideline threat as well. And so Jackson Smith and Jigba gives you a guy who can really threaten that part of the field, and where I don't think you had that. You didn't really have a tight end who could do that effectively. And then, you've got some solid running backs who may be banged up, but they are good players nonetheless. And then defensively, you spend a first round pick on the corner out of Illinois, Devin Witherspoon. So you improve your secondary, regardless of whether he plays outside or inside, which I think it seems that he's going to be kind of playing that nickel role quite a bit. But either way, that's an improvement there. You've got Tariq Woolen, who's another year into his career, and maybe will he have as many interceptions this year? I don't know. But we know that he's at least a viable player. And then you bring Bobby Wagner back to improve the run defense. You get Draymond Jones in there, who's a nice addition. I still don't know where they're going to get big time pass rush from, but I think that they are a high quality team across the board. And I think ultimately, if the 49ers weren't just so loaded with star level players, whether you're talking about Christian McCaffrey or Brandon Ayuk or George Kittle or Deebo Samuel, just skill players across the board. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I mean, Nick Bosa, Javon Hargrave, both of their linebackers, Hufanga, who played incredibly well last year. I mean, you could probably select 3 to 4 players as possible defensive player of the year, and any of them have a very realistic chance to take that award. And so when you have that, despite the quarterback, I don't want to say supremacy, but despite the level of quarterback that they have in Seattle, at least that it would seem, I still have to go with the 49ers overall as the best of that division. All right. All the divisions are in the books. All we have left are the wild card teams for the NFC. So again, 3 teams. We have the Cowboys, the Lions, and the Saints. For Kyle, I think this makes a lot of sense. I think the Cowboys are one of the best 3 teams in the NFC. So if they're not taking their division, makes a lot of sense they'd be in. The Lions and the Saints, I both picked as my division winners. So I wholeheartedly agree with those. Anything here stand out to you?
No, I don't think so. I think those are perfectly realistic wildcard teams, especially with the Saints and Lions not winning the division. I think that's pretty reasonable in this conference that they can still sneak into the wild card.
All right. And so for you, who are your division or your NFC wildcard teams?
I have the Seahawks, Vikings, and Cowboys. Seahawks and Vikings we kind of talked about. Cowboys, like you mentioned, probably up top to bottom, one of the best rosters in this conference. They're probably going to be the 3rd best team in the conference, like you mentioned. At the end of the day, I don't trust Dak enough to really have enough confidence in them doing a deep playoff run or winning enough games to compete with the Eagles for that division. But it's the NFC, and I think it's pretty clear to everyone the NFC is it's not as loaded as the AFC. So the Cowboys are still going to be good enough to win enough games to make the playoffs. I don't love them. There's a lot of things I think there's question marks on that team that, again, Mike McCarthy calling plays. I don't love that. Dak Prescott, Tony Pollard coming off a major leg injury, and now he is the lead back for this team, scares me a little bit. But top to bottom, they have one of the best defensive players in the NFL. That defense in general is going to be really good again. I think they're going to compete in a lot of games, and they're going to find their way to make the wild card. I don't love them, but I have them just because the rest of the conference isn't great, in my opinion.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. So Kyron has a similar set of picks. He has the Cowboys, the 49ers, and the Vikings. And so as far as the Cowboys go, I'll just throw in my picks here too, just to keep it simple. So I have the Cowboys, Seahawks, and Falcons. So I think the Cowboys are, darn near a playoff lock. They have a very good defense across the board, tremendous pass rush, good coverage. I think they've gotten better there, if anything, with the addition of Stephon Gilmore. Offensively, banking on the health of Tyron Smith is always a question, is always a bit risky at this point, but they have a very good offensive line. Terrence Steele, they've got Tyler Biotish, who's developed well. They've got Tyler Smith, who played really well last year, and then Tyron Smith, who's, young enough that he's still good when he's on the field. It's just the injuries that have been the real concern there. And then, CeeDee Lamb, who's become a tremendous player. And then the addition of Brandon Cooks is a really nice move. A really nice value move to improve that second receiver spot. And, then you've got some depth there as well. And Pollard, we'll see how impactful he is right out of the gates, but I think they have a good enough passing attack that they should be a good team. And then ultimately we'll just come down to how far in the playoffs can they get. I took the Seahawks and the Falcons for reasons that we talked about already. So I wonder, to be perfectly honest, and I kind of suspect that both the Packers and the Vikings might actually be better teams than the Falcons. So I'm down with them being selected as potential wildcard teams. But the issue to me is that I don't think either of them are quite good enough to really take hold of that second spot in the division. I think that they are going to probably lose some games to AFC teams. I think they're going to lose to other, I think they have to get through a harder division, I think. And the Falcons have just, I believe, according to a lot of sources, the easiest schedule based on projected win totals from other teams. And so I'm going to trust that a little bit. I think that maybe they're slightly worse overall, but will end up with a slightly better record because of that. I think that, the Vikings and the Packers might lose games to each other, and that might be the difference. So I'm going to take the Seahawks and the Falcons, the Cowboys, to make it to the playoffs, which would be good for Arthur Smith's career because they need it to happen.
Yep.
All right. So that does it for all of our division picks. The next thing that we have are Super Bowl picks. And then we're going to go through the some of the individual awards for the season. And so these ones are sometimes the most fun to predict. Everybody thinks the Eagles are going to be good, right? So how much of a conversation is that really? So when we talk about some of these other individual awards, I think that it gets a little bit more spicy. Let's put it that way. All right. So the very first thing that we're going to go into here is the Super Bowl runner-up. So this one is these are all shots in the dark, but we can kind of operate off of the vibe with which teams are coming out of the offseason with. So Kyle, he took the Chiefs. I don't think you need to say much there. We've talked about them as being one of, if not the best team in the NFL. So the Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes as a starter have never fallen short of the AFC Championship game, and they've been in the Super Bowl more often than they haven't. Out of his 5 seasons, they've been there 3 out of 5 years, and they've been in the AFC Championship game every year. So it's not exactly going out on a limb to predict them to make it back, so that's fair enough there. What about you? Who is your Super Bowl runner-up?
I have the Bengals as my Super Bowl runner-up. A big part of that, I mentioned earlier, they were just in the Super Bowl a couple years ago, and I think they've improved that roster. One thing I have them making it over the Chiefs to the Super Bowl is I don't think the Chiefs are going to host a playoff game this year. I think they're going to get to that AFC Championship game. I think it will be the Chiefs. But I think there's a real chance the Bengals host it this year. I think the Bengals are that good in my opinion. I think the Chiefs may drop off a little bit with the loss of some of the overall weapons on this team. They're very young. I think they're going to be games where the young receivers aren't enough for the Chiefs to be a number 1 seed again. So I think there's a legit chance the Bengals host the AFC Championship game this year. And at the end of the day, I mentioned it earlier, I think they have the best roster in this conference, and I trust Joe Burrow about as much as any quarterback in the NFL, even with Mahomes there. I mean, those two are, in my opinion, 1 and 2, and Mahomes 1, Burrow 2 in the NFL at quarterback. So I have the Bengals as my Super Bowl runner-up.
Yeah, I rank them very similarly. I think it's Mahomes and Burrow is the 1-2 punch. Kyron has the Ravens, so not only does he have them winning the division, he also has them making it all the way through to the playoffs and ultimately coming up short. Again, I think this is kind of fun to actually have to make the arguments for the other guys because I didn't ask them for specific notes on why, but again, it's the change in offensive scheme. It's the addition of the playmakers. Their offensive line is very good as well. We're kind of expecting Ronnie Stanley to really, truly be himself after that long return from injury. I think I have no doubt they'll be good. They will make it to the playoffs, according to my prediction. I think it's going to be tough for them to get through the gauntlet of other AFC teams. I think their defense is taking a step back. They've lost Marcus Peters, so the other corner spot is not as solidified, at least in terms of veteran presence. Their safety room is really good. And I think they'll be able to score. I think they'll be able to put up points and move the ball. And I think that they will have a good defense. I don't know if their pass rush and slight loss of talent in the secondary is going to be enough. I think if you want to make it to the Super Bowl, you have to be able to rush the passer. And you've got to be able to do it without blitzing because, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Aaron Rodgers, they all do a really good job against the blitz. So when you take guys out of coverage and you put them, in that extra rush spot, then you're not exactly in a good situation. So that's why I would say that I don't think they make it, but I certainly think it's reasonable to choose them, and I do think they'll make the playoffs at least. Yeah. So my final, my runner-up is the Philadelphia Eagles. So I think they make it back to the Super Bowl again. I think that they are the best team in the NFL, or the best team in the NFC. I think the 49ers are probably the second best. And I think the quarterback situation is going to be what elevates them in the big moment. Again, I think we are very likely looking at a repeat of the 49ers versus Eagles to get to the big game. And I think the Eagles come out on top again. I think they are a dominant offensive line, dominant defensive line. And that's really the makings of a great team. And then Jalen Hurts, who just gets better and better every single year. So I think that they make it. I do just think that they fall short of the actual championship itself. All right. So on to the Super Bowl winners. Kyle obviously feels that the 49ers are one of the best teams in the NFL as well. He has them winning. So that is the 49ers over the Chiefs. So rematch of a few years ago, except that they win this time versus the Chiefs winning. We talked about it plenty. I don't think there's anything else I can say as far as why they will be the winner. But I think it's reasonable for them to get through. They're the number 2 team for me, but they just don't have the same quarterback. So that's why I held it back. Who is your Super Bowl winner?
I have the Eagles winning the Super Bowl. They were really close last year. They were up big in the Super Bowl going into halftime. I think they're up 10. They just couldn't pull it off against the Chiefs. They were right there. I think they got better in some spots. And I think the big thing with a Bengals-Philly matchup, I think you're going to see a very similar thing that happened to the Bengals when they played the Rams in the Super Bowl. And that pass rush just kind of overwhelmed that offensive line in that game. And even though I think the Bengals offensive line is better than it was in that Super Bowl. This Philly pass rush is absurd, and they're going to get to Joe Burrow. They're going to cause problems, and then that offense can go toe-to-toe with anyone in the NFL. So I think at the end of the day, that defense is going to overwhelm the Bengals too much and leading the Eagles to a Super Bowl.
Right. So I've already talked to them about them as my runner-up. You've already talked about them as your winner. So with Kyron having them also as the winner, I don't think I need to comment too much on that. And I think so that means that Kyle has it 49ers over Chiefs. You have it Eagles over Bengals. He has it Eagles over Ravens. And I have the Bengals as my Super Bowl winner. So you and I have the same teams going to the Super Bowl. You just have the Eagles winning versus me having the Bengals winning. I think that this is just Joe Burrow's year. I just think he's going to take them all the way. I think even if the game goes through Arrowhead, which I think it might, because I think the AFC North is a tougher division than the AFC West. So I think, the Chiefs will may well end up having the best record in the conference. I think that the Bengals, it's just their time. So if they have to go through, the Chiefs in Arrowhead, so be it. I think that they can do it, and I think they'll end up winning. I think they were extremely close to winning the Super Bowl a couple of years ago against the Rams. I think that there's an urgency there as well, because they know that just based on cost, a lot of these guys on the Bengals are probably not going to be around for a long time. And even though they're not maybe talking about that on a daily basis in the building, I think everyone is aware of it, that things will probably change up, and this is a big opportunity for them. I think there's just an urgency. I think Joe Burrow may be the most elite competitor in the NFL, and I don't know if there's a way to measure that, but from the eye test, I think he's just incredible. And I think every year he's been in the NFL, he's learned, and I think he's gotten better, and I think this is really his year. So I think that he's going to go and win the Bengals a Super Bowl. So hope people are excited about that.
I like that a lot.
All right. So on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we have the number one overall pick. So I had a number of things right last year. This is one of the ones I had right. I did predict the Bears to have the first overall pick, which they ended up having and then trading away. So we'll go with Kyle first. I think a lot of people have very similar thoughts on this. He has selected the Arizona Cardinals to have the first overall pick. Their quarterback's hurt. They are starting a quarterback, I think, who hasn't even been on the roster for training camp. Their offensive line is not good. Their defensive line is not particularly good. They lost their best corner in free agency, I think.
Lost their best pass rusher in free agency.
They lost their best receiver in free agency. They've got
our safety wants out.
They re-upped his contract, I think, or they adjusted it, so he's okay for now. But most of the good players are gone, and many of the good players are gone, I should say. Paris Johnson Jr. is a pick for the future. I think that he was less pro ready than other guys in the draft, and I know not everybody agrees with that. That's how I saw it, and I understand selecting him, but I also don't anticipate him being a great player year one, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It is what it is. I think similarly with their second round pick, very high athleticism. I don't anticipate him really being a plus player early, so I don't think that their roster lends itself to success really across the board. I don't see anything that I feel really good about. So I'm sorry. I do anticipate that Kyler Murray is probably going to be on another roster next year. I know that the cap is complicated, but if there's ever a time that they'll get compensation, I assume that it would be after this year. And so, yeah, is it maybe it's too obvious who my pick is also, but who did you select as your first overall pick?
I also have the Cardinals for pretty much all the reasons you just said. I mean, it looks like this is as most a tank job a team can do since the Colts tanked for Andrew Luck, and they didn't even really tank for him. Peyton was just hurt. Like after Peyton was announced done for the year, they like went into tank mode. They didn't go into that with the idea of tanking really. So this is as much of a tank job as you can get. I know the rumors with Caleb Williams, what might happen at USC are there, but even if Caleb Williams decides to stay, Drake May is a perfectly suitable number 1 overall pick. Like this quarterback class is really, really good. The Cardinals are clearly trying to start over as a franchise. Does it count? This is another reason I had them getting number 1 overall pick. Does it count if Houston has the worst record? Because they get Houston's first round pick.
It does not count. No, it has to be the team that ends with the.
Okay. I still have the Cardinals with the worst record, but they might have the first and second overall pick, which will be fascinating to watch. But I think it's gonna be tough to watch this year.
Yeah, no, and I don't think the Texans will have the first overall pick. I think their offensive line is solid. I think they'll not be good, but they'll be better than that. So Kyron has the Rams with the first overall pick, which I could see that because, it really does depend on a couple of guys staying healthy. But to me, if these 3 guys are healthy, they will almost by default have a better record than the Cardinals. I mean, you got Matthew Stafford, you've got Aaron Donald, and you've got a Cooper Kupp, right? So just between those 3 guys, I anticipate them having a better overall record. And I know that's like maybe not giving enough credit to the rest of the players on the team. I know that they've got a ton of guys who are young, who are either undrafted free agents or rookies or guys who haven't played very much and are cheap. But I think, you look at the offensive line, at the very least, they have Joe Noteboom, Brian Allen, Rob Havenstein, and then Steve Avila is, I think, a pretty much pro-ready second-round pick that they've invested. So their offensive line, I do believe, will be better than last year. And as long as the guys can stay healthy, this team is going to be better than next year. I know that Kyron is not high on Sean McVay, but, even that being the case, I still think that they're going to be better than I think they care more. I think they're more invested in doing well this season. I really don't think so. And then, of course, I have the Cardinals as the first overall pick because for all the reasons that we just mentioned.
Yeah.
All right. On a happier note, or a more pleasant note, rather, we're going to go through the passing, rushing, and receiving leader for the NFL. So this is not touchdowns or any other stat. It's just straight up passing yards, just to keep it simple. So Kyle had Justin Herbert as his pick for the leading passer in the NFL. And I think he was the leading passer last year. Did he lead the NFL?
He was second.
Okay.
I have it pulled up right here. Mahomes beat him by about 500 yards.
500. Oh, my God.
It's 52-50 to 47-39.
Okay. So, I think it's very reasonable. I won't touch on it too much because we might have some similar picks here. But who do you have as your leading passer?
I also have Justin Herbert as my leading passer. I think a big part of it, he was second last year. I mentioned it earlier when I talked about them making the playoffs. Kellen Moore being the offensive coordinator here, I think they're going to take more shots downfield. In those, he's healthy too. I think that was a big thing. He was second in the NFL last year in passing yards with broken ribs, and both his receivers missed times. I think his weapons around him are better. They're going to take more shots downfield. They're going to be in games just in the nature of the conference that they're in, where he's going to have big passing games if they want to win. It's going to be tough to beat Mahomes, especially since Mahomes beat him by 500 yards last year, which I didn't realize until I looked it up. But I think Herbert, just in the nature of this offense and what it needs, I think he's going to have to be right up there among the leaders.
Yeah, so I don't think that I know that the offensive coordinator changed. and the offensive line should be healthier, but I still don't necessarily think they're going to be that good at running the ball. And I think that means it's going to fall on him a lot to pass the ball. I think you've got 4 legitimate receivers there. You've got the big 2, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, and then you got their first round pick, Quentin Johnson, and then you got Eckler is a very viable receiver out of the backfield. I would not be at all surprised if he had close to or more passing or receiving yards than actual rushing yards. So we'll see, but I think it's going to fall on him a lot. I think he's got more weapons. I think he's going to have more time to throw because he's going to have his former All-Pro left tackle back. So that's going to be very helpful. And hopefully his receivers stay healthier. I think they'll be a good offense. I think he's going to throw it down the field more. And I just suspect that it's going to fall on him to make those plays because they still aren't going to be that good at running the ball. So I tend to agree with you. I think I've outed myself, even though I'm going to put Kyron's here next. He has Joe Burrow, and I have a hard time disagreeing with that. He has everything set up as well for that kind of year. The receivers, an improved offensive line, and just the fact that we believe he's one of the top 2 quarterbacks in the NFL. I don't think that you can really argue with that. I have Justin Herbert as well, because I just think they'll be a little bit more balanced in Cincinnati in terms of the ability to run the ball. And so I don't know if he will have quite as many pass attempts, but I certainly think that it's possible that either one could be the passing leader really pretty easily. All right, rushing leader in the NFL. So I'll go with Kyle first here. Kyle picked Nick Chubb, which I get. I mean, he's been near the top of the league in rush yards. He's kind of a pure receiver or pure rusher, not really as much of a receiver as some of the other big time guys. They have one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. And if Deshaun Watson doesn't look that good, they will certainly be leaning on the run game more so. I don't really have a good reason why I didn't personally pick Chubb. I think it's very viable. I just had somebody else in mind, but I'll let you carry the torch from here.
Yeah, I also have Nick Chubb as the leading rusher. I think a big part of it, he was 3rd last year. You mentioned it a little bit. He has one of the best offensive lines in football blocking for him. I think they're going to lean on him a lot, especially early until Deshaun Watson maybe gets his feet under him. I think especially early on in the season, you're going to see a lot of Chubb being involved. It might be more rushing attempts than passing attempts for the Browns to start the season. And I think a big thing, he's no longer splitting reps with Kareem Hunt. I know obviously it didn't hurt him too much in the past. He's obviously been among the leaders throughout his career, but they don't really have that viable second running back option to take Chubb off the field. Now it's pretty much just Nick Chubb as the running back, and a bunch of younger, unproven guys. And so I think Nick Chubb is kind of the only option they have to really stay in football games in terms of the run game. And then just, you look at the guys ahead of him. Derrick Henry was ahead of him. I think he's going to miss more time than he missed last year. That's going to hurt him a little bit. Josh Jacobs led the league in rushing. I think they're going to be behind in too many games to rely on him running the ball in Vegas. So I think the Browns are going to compete in more games, I think, than people think. I think they're going to really lean on Chubb as really the only viable back on that team.
Yeah, I think Jerome Ford has shown some interesting things. I don't know if he'll take away enough touches to really impede that. And I do know that they run the ball a lot there. It's what they do. So I think, one of the things is just the Browns are tough because they could be anywhere from the division winner to a top 10 pick. It's so hard. And if I go off of what my predictions are, then, they're probably not going to be leading in a lot of games. They may have to diverge from their wish to run the ball in order to try and catch up in games. So we'll see. It's very reasonable pick. It really is. It's just not where I went. Kyron went with Derrick Henry. So Henry is, I mean, he's led the NFL in rushing,
Yeah.
I think multiple times at this point. So they also run the ball there. The issue is for me is that at some point, I just think that I don't want to put this on him, but realistically, everybody gets hurt in the NFL. It's 100% injury rate. And he's really kind of steered clear of that up to this point. And how many touches can he take without sustaining a major injury? And then you throw on top of that, their offensive line is not good. Peter Skoronski was a great pick, but aside from that, their offensive line is just not that good. And the quarterback is not a whole heck of a lot of a threat. And I just don't think DeAndre Hopkins is the player that is really threatening defenses either. So it's just kind of, it's a lot on one player. And if anything happens, if the defense is just, you know, I don't know, maybe I'm just another year too early on his decline, but it seems like really fighting the odds for him to be the leading rusher again. There's just so many things that could happen that make it unlikely. But again, he's been that guy for quite a while. So what do I know? All right. I went with Bijan Robinson as my pick to lead the NFL in rushing yards. And that is really just because while they are similar to both the Browns and the Titans, who, I mean, you'll see a trend here. These are teams that want to run the ball. Like they will run the ball more often than not. The downside of the Titans is that they have an aging player at the running back position and their offensive line is not good. When you look at the Browns, we also are seeing a running back on his second contract when we tend to see guys start to slow down a little bit. So even if it's not this year, might be getting close, and they do have a good offensive line. I think the Falcons have all the positives when it comes to expectation for production from a running back. Got a young guy, and I mean, this is not just anybody. He is incredible. He was so good coming out of Texas, and he does everything. He does, you know, he does all the pass protection stuff. He does everything. So there's no reason to take him off the field. He has some mileage, but college mileage at this point. You know, he has burst. He has everything. He'll have home run plays, and they love to run the ball, and they have a coach who's good at scheming the run game, and they have a good offensive line. So to me, it is a little bit of a risk picking a rookie, but I do think that they have everything that you need when you look at who's going to be the leading rusher in the NFL. They've got the young, explosive running back who never comes off the field. They got the offensive line. They got the desire to run the ball and a coach who can scheme it up. So I think in terms of that, that's who I picked. But I think either one of the other guys, particularly Nick Chubb, are very reasonable selections. All right.
By the way, I do like the Robinson pick. I think it is a really good pick. My one concern is, I know you mentioned there's no reason to take him off the field, but they do have Algier and they do have Cordell Patterson. I think those guys may not take him off the field, but they could be on the field at the same time and take some touches away from Robinson. Not enough to like make him unreasonable to lead the league in rushing, but I think it's enough to like maybe Nick Chubb just sneaks past him without the competition.
Yeah, I get that. I do. But I also have a feeling that I know once the games start and they see who's really, really getting them the yardage, I think it's going to be hard for them to lean away from that. I mean, you know, Arthur Smith was the coordinator for a bunch of years while they were running Derrick Henry into the ground. I believe that they have exactly the same plan in place. So, and I'm not sure Tyler Algier is going to be taking him off the field for more than just letting him rest a little bit. All right. Yeah, so receiving leader. This one too, man. Like a lot of people had the same picks here. All right. So Kyle had Tyreek Hill, which is not a surprise. He didn't lead the league last year, but I think he was second. I believe he was second behind Jordan Addison. Similar reasons. I don't think they're going to really run the ball super well
Mm-hmm.
in Miami. So I think they'll be throwing the ball a lot. I think he's going to have a lot of yards after catch. I just think it's hard to repeat statistical seasons like that. For the most part, regression is more likely than not, but it's still super incredibly explosive. And Tua is going to want to get the ball out quick, just like he did. So
Yep.
I think there are a lot of opportunities for him to certainly be in the top 5. I didn't pick any of the guys who went 1 or 2 last year, just because I think that we're likely to have just variance there. Who did you have as your top receiving leader?
I also have Tyreek Hill. It was really tough not to pick someone like Justin Jefferson, it seems like he's going to be among the league leaders every year. But I think people forget a little bit that Tyreek Hill was on pace early in the year for 2,000 receiving yards until Tua got hurt. That's kind of when Hill's production dropped down, and Tua's obviously at risk of injury, more so than most quarterbacks, just the nature of the injuries that he's had. The offensive line isn't great, like we've mentioned before, but McDaniels, I think, is as good a coach at scheming his best players to get open and getting them the football as anyone. I think he showed that last year. He surprised a lot of people with his ability as a head coach, and I think one of them was, even though Tyreek Hill is that speed demon, the deep threat, and Tua doesn't have the biggest arm in the world, they were still able to get Hill those deep shots and get him the yards after catch, like you mentioned. And you mentioned a second ago, I don't think they're going to run the ball particularly much. They're going to have to throw the ball to stay in games, just the nature of this conference. So I think Hill is going to get a ton of production. Obviously, has Waddle there to steal catches and yards and stuff, but I think Hill's too explosive. He can catch a 5-yard slant route and take it 70 yards. Like, that's what this guy can do. So I think Hill's going to have a big year, and if Tua can stay healthy, I don't see a reason why they can't repeat what they did last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure that I really feel that great about picking this award because, there are so many guys who could be the number one receiver in the NFL from a yardage standpoint. I think, you'd say that Tyreek probably has one of the best number 2s taking touches away from him, but obviously that didn't really matter that much last year. So I don't know. So Kyron also went with Tyreek Hill. So we'll see. I went with Stephon Diggs just because I think while they've added Dalton Kincaid and he is a good player, we have yet to see how quickly that translates to actual production on an NFL field. Gabe Davis was pretty underwhelming last year. I think a lot of people, myself included, expected a jump from him after his big playoff game. It never really happened. So I don't think he has to share that many targets the same way that some of these other guys do. A Chase, a Jefferson, now that Addison is there. A lot of the other number 1 guys in the NFL, I just don't think that he's going to have to share as much. I think Garrett Wilson is kind of like that in that he is like the unequivocal number 1, and he's probably going to get a lot of targets. I think the Jets will run the ball a little bit more than the Bills. So I think Stephon Diggs is primed for a very big year. And so I picked him, but aside from that, I don't really have great reasons other than just a little bit of a gut feeling. So that's who I've got.
I like
there.
it. And you mentioned the other top guys being Jefferson. They brought in Addison, like you mentioned. Hill has Waddle. AJ Brown has Devontae Smith. And then the only other guy that doesn't have like a huge number 2 next to him that were in the top 5 was Devontae Adams. But then you talk about quarterback questions there with Jimmy Garoppolo coming over, the head coach, all that kind of stuff. So he's got questions beyond the people, his other receivers. Stephon is kind of the only guy that has the clear, really good quarterback, not a real guy to take touches away from him. So he was 5th last year. So obviously he's not too far off.
All right. So that takes us to the awards, those that are given rather than won per se. And we're going to start with the rookies. So first off, we have the Offensive Rookie of the Year. So in the name of receivers, Kyle had Jordan Addison. So I like Addison. He was my number 2 receiver in the draft this year. I think that he'll certainly get touches. I think he'll get targets. I think he'll be good. I think he needs a little bit more time to work on his route running. I think he's still primarily a deep threat, and that I think he'll be productive. I don't think he'll be quite good enough to win the award. For me, there's a player that I think is like he's as much of a lock as anybody has been to win the Offensive Rookie of a Year award in a long time. So even though I don't think Jordan Addison is a bad pick, I couldn't bring myself to pick him over another player. So who's your Offensive Rookie of the Year?
I think we have the same mindset with this one. I have Bijan. I think he is, like you mentioned, he is incredible. He is going to be among the league leaders in rushing yards, I think, in total yards too. He's going to catch plenty of passes out of the backfield with that team. And really, the biggest thing, not only is it because Bijan's incredible, I think the rest of the offensive rookies are just a little bit underwhelming. I mean, you look at just from a straight odds perspective, Bijan's the straight favorite. And you've got the three quarterbacks right there. I don't see any of them really winning it. Then you go Jahmyr Gibbs next, and then Jordan Addison, and you got a huge gap between Bijan and Gibbs after the quarterback. So I think it's pretty clear. Bijan looks the part. I think he's going to be the part on the field, and I don't think there's really much competition for him with this one.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it could be close, but it's hard for me to pick anybody else myself. So Kyron went with Anthony Richardson. So this is interesting because, Richardson's going to get, if he runs the ball like we expect him to run the ball, he's going to have a lot of highlights. He's going to have a lot of flash plays. So I think, he will be in the conversation at the end of the year if he runs the ball, because throwing the ball we'll see, because the whole Colts offense is a little up in the air, but he will have a lot of SportsCenter top 10 plays. He will. I'm sure of it. He's he's like Cam Newton. He's so big. He's so athletic. He's gonna juke guys. He's gonna truck guys. He's gonna hurdle guys. He's gonna do all that stuff, and he's a crazy arm. He's gonna have at least a couple of plays where it's like, oh my God, did he just throw that 70 yards to the corner of the end zone? Like, that kind of stuff's gonna happen. I think that Bijan is going to be a little bit more productive consistently. I think he's going to have his own share of highlight plays. I think he's going to be the reason that the Falcons do make it to the playoffs as a wild card team. Look, I have him leading the league in rushing, so it's kind of hard to lead the league in rushing as a rookie and not win this award. So I kind of locked myself into it, to be honest. But yeah, I think he's too good of a player. He's the best player in the draft, aside from maybe Jalen Carter, and he only went where he went because he's a running back, right? But he will probably be the most impactful rookie, and I'm pretty confident in that. All right, Defensive Rookie of the Year. All right, so that is kind of a nice segue, because Jalen Carter is the player that I think is the best. He could very well lead rookies in sacks. He could very well lead rookies in tackles for loss. He'll have flash plays. It's really a question of how focused is he? Is he on point? Because we've already seen some misjudgments in terms of the decision-making process. So, we'll see if that all comes to fruition. The other thing is that he's probably not going to be a designated starter. And while they do rotate guys pretty consistently, so he'll probably get out there on the field, will he accumulate the stats necessary to win the award? That's one of the things that I question. But certainly in terms of talent and what I thought of him coming out, I can absolutely agree with this selection. So who did you have as your Defensive Rookie of the Year?
I have Will Anderson. I do love the Jalen Carter one. I think a lot of why I didn't pick Jalen Carter is kind of what you mentioned. I think he's just going to get rotated out too quickly. I think that pass rush is so deep for Philly that you're just going to see drives where you don't see Jalen Carter on the field and they're not losing production there. So I think Jalen Carter's, in terms of a stat thing, may dwindle compared to Will Anderson. There's no one for Will to lose his spot to. They're going to throw Will out there. He is going to be their top pass rusher every game, every drive. So barring any injuries, I don't see him ever leaving the field. And looking at him in the preseason, he looked very, very good. He looks ready to be a very good pass rusher right out of the gate. And he gets really bad offensive lines to go against. You know, the thing Carter has to go against, he has to go against the Cowboys twice a year. They have a good offensive line. You know, the Commanders, they're not great, but they have a solid line. The Giants have been improving their line. Will Anderson, he gets the Jags, who we talked about. It's not a great offensive line. He gets the Colts twice a year. It's not a great offensive line. And he gets the Titans twice a year, who might have one of the worst offensive lines. So he's going against bad O-lines every game for this division. He's not going to get taken off the field. And he, at least in the preseason, looked every bit the part that of the high draft pick that he was. So I think it's going to come down to numbers more than anything else. It's going to be tough because that Texans defense is not going to be very well rated. So that's going to weigh on him a little bit, but I think his numbers are going to be too impressive.
Yeah, I get it. Kyron also had Will Anderson. I think it's a viable choice. He was one of the best players in the draft, one of the most pro-ready. This is a tough award because you do have to have stats. And one of the things I am concerned about is, will he face enough passing situations going up against teams when they will often be behind? That's tough. I also think that their defense is not necessarily talented enough that offenses can't consistently scheme extra blockers against him. I think he's going to face a lot of chips, running backs from tight ends. I think he's going to be in a lot of situations where it's hard for him to just go all out in one-on-one situations as a pass rusher, because the rest of the team's just not that good yet. So it's definitely possible. He has the pedigree, he has the talent, the skill. I wonder if situationally he'll have as many opportunities. Although you did say that he doesn't go against the best offensive lines, and that's fair. So we'll see what the actual final breakdown is. So my defensive rookie of the year, I've gone back and forth on this a little bit between Jalen Carter and who I ultimately selected, and that is Jack Campbell, the linebacker from the Lions. So I think Campbell is going to be a stat monster. I think he's going to clean up in tackles for loss. I'm not fully clear on whether he's going to be a week one starter for them.
I think so. I think he is going to be.
I just know that if he's not starting, he's going to beat out one of the guys there almost immediately, because the dude is incredible. When I was doing the evaluations leading up to the draft, I was like, man, this guy, he's one of the best players in the draft. And if he doesn't go in the first round, I really think that at the end of it all, we are going to be asking, why were we so insistent that he's, just because he's a linebacker, he's not a first round pick? Because he did some incredible things in Iowa, and he's so consistent and he's so smart. And so for me, I'm like, linebackers, I think it's tough to win the award if you're not a defensive lineman or a linebacker. And I think that, from a stat standpoint, he's primed to win it. I think he's going to be a superstar, if not by the end of this year. In short order, I think he's a very good player, and he's one of the reasons that I'm so high on the Lions draft this past year. So I know a lot of people like Brian Branch, but for me, I think he's the best player that they drafted, and he's going to show that return pretty early on. So,
and he does have one thing that's really going to help him. I mentioned earlier, it's going to hurt Will Anderson a little bit with that Texans defense not being very good, and the Texans in general just not doing very well. If the Lions defense can take the step a lot of people think they're going to take with how much they improved this draft, and he has the stats that we mentioned, and they make the playoffs and all these things, all that's going to be taken into consideration when talking about this award for him,
Mm-hmm.
which all point to his favor. It's not a sexy pick. It's not the 12 sacks. It's not the interceptions. It's not the sexy pick there. But like you said, he's going to be one of the reasons this defense improves as much as we think they will, and you'll have the numbers to back it up.
All right. So, coach of the year. So, to be coach of the year, generally speaking, you need to win your division, make it to the playoffs, and usually it's a team that has improved substantially, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to win this if you've already been pretty competitive. You don't usually win this award for going from 10 wins to 12 wins or 10 to 13, right? Usually there needs to be a market improvement. So I just don't know how many like preseason identifiable options there are for this award. So for me, it's just the teams that are most likely to do the best versus how they did last year. And so even though Kyle didn't pick the Jets to win the division, he did pick Robert Saleh to win Coach of the Year, which to me just implies that he expects the Jets to be well into the double digits of wins and just barely fall short of the Bills. That's really the only way that this makes sense, which I think is viable. And it's a way that you can win it. For me, Robert Saleh makes a lot of sense because I expect the Jets to be much better than they were last year. And I think both sides of the ball are going to be very good. Aside from maybe the offensive line, I don't think that we're going to look at this team throughout the year and say there is a weakness here. And I think you can look at last year and how the defense performed as kind of what you can believe in terms of getting these guys ready to play week to week, where this is not just like, oh, they've got better players, they're going to be great. Like we've seen it happen. And now the offense is a lot more talented. So I think it's a very reasonable selection. Who is your pick for Coach of the Year?
I have Dan Campbell. A lot of it, like you mentioned, I think the Lions are going to win the division. That helps a lot. They missed the playoffs last year, so he's taking a team that missed the playoffs to winning the division. Both those are in line with what you mentioned. I think another defining factor of coaches of the year a lot of times, this is more to go across to another sport. This happens in the NBA a lot. Happens in the NFL every now and then. Didn't happen last year because Brian Daboll won it. He wasn't a coach before. But sometimes with Coach of the Year awards, it's often the guy that like should have won it last year. And they're like, oh, we probably could have won it last year. Did basically the same thing this year. We'll give it to you this year. And Dan Campbell, while Brian Daboll wasn't a bad pick to win Coach of the Year, Campbell could have won Coach of the Year even though the Lions missed the playoffs. I don't think a lot of people would have been too upset about it. And I think if the Lions can take the step that we have talked about throughout the show and win the division, a team that hasn't won the division in over 30 years, I think it's hard to not give Campbell that award.
Yeah, I get that. I don't know if I would say that he deserved it last year. You kind of have to make the playoffs to get the award, I think. But I do understand what you mean about there is a very clear upward trajectory for the Lions, which I think is important. When you take over a team and they're bad, you need to inspire players for at least enough years to change the culture and then actually have everyone bought in when you finally have all the players to get it done. So I think the Robert Saleh pick and the Dan Campbell pick are very much in line with each other in terms of teams that weren't good, teams that have shown flashes but didn't make the playoffs and have continued to improve the roster and should be good and potentially win the division, if not at least make the playoffs this year. So both of them make a lot of sense to me. Then Kyron had John Harbaugh. So John Harbaugh has not ever won Coach of the Year before. I'm not sure. I think I heard somewhere, and this is anecdotal, so it might not be correct, but I think he's also never even gotten votes for Coach of the Year, which does seem kind of crazy. But also, at this point, it's not very easy to elevate your standing among coaches when you're over a decade into your career. I mean, he took over in 2008,
Yeah.
I think. So, we're talking about 25 years, or not 25, 15 years of being the head coach of the Baltimore Ravens, with some incredible performances from his teams in that span. I mean, he won the Super Bowl. He's had an MVP. He's had Defensive Players of the Year. He's had everything. I think he's had Defensive Players of the Year. He's had everything, and a lot of division champions. I don't know what he could do this year that would elevate him to where people are like, this is the guy that needs to win this award. And I don't know if that's fair necessarily, but I just think that's the way it is. So if we're talking about prediction, it's hard for me to predict John Harbaugh. Now, I know that Kyron has them going to the Super Bowl and ultimately losing and winning the division. So I get that. At least it tracks. But I don't know if I'd be comfortable picking that, because I just feel like it's unlikely in the scheme of things. So for me, I have Robert Saleh as well. Same idea. Jets, I think, are going to win the division. If not, they'll be very close. I think they'll be very good. And I think he's also going to benefit from the Jets being in the spotlight so much. They have a ton of primetime games. And they also were on Hard Knocks. So a lot of people are coming off of a very positive Hard Knocks experience where he looked really good. And so assuming everything else goes positively, that's going to be in his mind. And I think that, if the Lions had made the playoffs last year, Dan Campbell would have gotten a similar bump from his Hard Knocks exposure. I think both guys came out of that show highly regarded. And I don't think that was untrue before, but I think that it helped. And I think if the Jets are as good as I expect them to be this year, then he is a likely pick. Now, here's one where we really have to spend very little time on it. And I don't mean to gloss over it, but let's be honest. As soon as he plays, he's a lock for comeback player of the year. Damar Hamlin is, I don't know if the best story, but certainly like an important story, to literally lost his life on the football field last year to come back and be playing. I don't think it makes any sense to give it to anybody else. I considered, I was like, if it's not him, who else might it be? But ultimately it was just too obvious. We all picked him and we all know he's going to win it as long as I think even if he gets hurt 4 games into the year and like tears his ACL, I still think he's going to win this award.
Oh yeah,
honestly.
absolutely.
So
it's truly, as soon as he steps on a football field, he wins it.
Yeah. I mean, he's going to have a standing ovation when they play the Jets on Monday Night Football. As soon as he's on the field, I think Jets, Giants, or Jets, Bills fans are both going to be applauding. It's going to be one of those things that it's going to be kind of beyond the colors you wear, and everybody's just going to be glad to see him playing. So I think that's
absolutely.
All right. So moving on, saved at least a little time here. So offensive player of the year. So you and Kyle have the same players, so I'm just going to jump straight through that and let you talk about it. Why do you have Tyreek Hill as your offensive player of the year?
I think a big part of it was I have him leading the league in receiving. We've talked about it before, you especially. This award is basically the best non-quarterback, right? Like, because the MVP is always going to be the quarterback. So offensive player of the year is often like, okay, who's a really good offensive player that's not a quarterback? I think Tyreek Hill, if he can be on pace for what he did again last year, he doesn't need to get 2,000 receiving yards, but if he can lead the league in receiving and have the amount of yardage that I think he's going to have, and accumulation with touchdowns and catches and all that kind of stuff, I think it's going to be hard to not give it to Tyreek. Yeah,
I get that. I do. And all 3 of you selected him as your receiving leader, and all 3 of you selected him as your offensive player of the year. And I think at this point it tracks. I don't love the offensive player of the year award. If we've come to the agreement societally that MVP is for the best quarterback, or the most valuable quarterback, and offensive player of the year is for the most valuable non-quarterback on offense. If we have agreed to that, I guess I can get behind it, even though the titling of the awards is kind of dumb. But if he is the receiving leader, then he probably has every opportunity to win the award. I have Christian McCaffrey because for me, I do think that it's probably who ends up with the most yards from scrimmage, which I think McCaffrey has a great opportunity to do. I think it may be a little bit lost in him getting traded mid-season, that people are maybe not thinking as much about all of this time in the offseason that Kyle Shanahan has been able to plan and scheme and just design his entire offense to feature him, because he is so good. He's so good. I think that he has a real opportunity to go for 1,000 and 1,000 rushing and receiving. And if he does that, I think he will win Offensive Player of the Year. I guess maybe it comes down to whoever has more yards, McCaffrey or whichever running back, dual threat running back, or receiving leader. I think that's it, because it's tough to win Offensive Player of the Year if all your touches are as a rusher and not a receiver. So that's why I've got him there. But we'll see. I think injury is a part of, why people might be more hesitant too. But if he is healthy, I think that he has every opportunity to win. All right.
And a big thing for him is, if the Niners, like we think they will be, are the second best team in that conference, and they don't have a star quarterback, if McCaffrey, if you can look at that offense and be like, oh, they were this good, and McCaffrey did this much for that team, he is about as valuable as it gets in the NFL. And they're, like you mentioned, they're not going to give it to him as the MVP because he's a running back. They're not going to give it to not a quarterback. I think Offensive Player of the Year is the best way to acknowledge the fact that McCaffrey led this team without a star quarterback to that kind of success.
All right. So Defensive Player of the Year. We are almost done. Okay. Defensive Player of the Year. It's an interesting award. It's hard to predict. This is often the one where we get the most variety in terms of, usually there's some similar groupthink on MVP. There's a lot of groupthink on Offensive Player of the Year. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, I think offense has less variance from year to year. So people are pretty confident with which direction they want to go there. But Defensive Player of the Year usually gets a variety of selections. And I think that's no different for us right now. So first off, Kyle has Micah Parsons, which makes a lot of sense. Might be the single best pass rusher in the NFL. I still think that, in terms of run defense, he's very good. I don't think he's not as good of a run defender as he is a pass rusher, but he certainly has a chance to lead the league in sacks. He has a chance to be the preeminent star on what could conceivably be the best defense in the NFL. And I think that he will have a very good year. Just depends on whether he'll win the award or not. So I get that pick. I do. He won Defensive Rookie of the Year, didn't win Defensive Player of the Year last year, even though a lot of people thought he might. He has a chance this year. Staying healthy will be a big part of it. And if he does, he has as much chance of anybody else to win it. Who is your Defensive Player of the Year?
I have TJ Watt as my Defensive Player of the Year. I was really 50-50 on him and Parsons. My big thing with Parsons, I picked him last year. And my one concern last year, what happened, is he's so versatile and good that they tend to use him in other ways other than a pure pass rusher. I think if you just put Parsons as a pure pass rusher, like the Steelers do for TJ Watt, Parsons could lead the league in sacks. I don't think they're going to do that again. I think they're going to use him for his versatility like they have. Whereas TJ Watt, he is on the field to get to the quarterback, and he has about as good a chance as anyone to break the NFL sack record. I think he's going to be up there in the high teens, maybe the low 20s in sacks. And if he can do that, and if the Steelers are, I don't have them making the playoffs, obviously, but if the Steelers are good, like people think they will be, it's a pretty clear, difference with the Steelers, especially how good they are with him on the field versus off the field. I think it's going to show this year, and TJ is going to be up there in sacks, which is a big boost for him. It's a numbers game a lot of times, and I think he's going to lead the league in sacks, leading to him winning that award.
Yeah, I think that's very realistic. He's won it before. He's one of the best defensive players in the NFL. I think he's a phenomenal player. And I do worry a little bit about injury because I think the way he plays is a little bit wild and it works for him. But I think he kind of throws himself around. I do wonder, if he's going to deal with injuries, at least nagging ones throughout the rest of his career. I think he has just as much opportunity to win this award as anybody else does, certainly as much as Micah Parsons does. Kyron has Myles Garrett, who again, same thing.
Yep.
I think him being in the new scheme with Jim Schwartz is a great opportunity for him to just rush the passer, just to go all out and really get upfield and wreak havoc on opposing offenses. It could be his best year. They were not good on defense last year, and will they immediately turn things around and have the opportunity to do that? That's really the question. Is as good as he might be, is he still going to have less numbers because they're going to be able to get the ball out more effectively? Are they going to be strong enough up the gut that teams aren't going to be able to run the ball on them, because they were last year and that was a problem. So those are just the questions there, but again, very realistic opportunity. And then I have Quinnen Williams as my defensive player of the year. So Quinnen, he was a first team All-Pro last year, had his best year by far. He's gotten better pretty much every year as a pro, and he had 12 or 12 and a half sacks last year. For an interior player, that's a lot. I also think that he benefits from having the best coverage out of all of these teams. I think that he is going to have coverage sack opportunities. I think he is one of the players here that's going to end up with a lot of TFLs to go along with his sacks. Again, similarly, I didn't just go down the list and just pick a bunch of Jets, right? But I do think that exposure is going to really help. They're going to have all these primetime games. They have DJ Reed and Sauce Gardner locking down the back end. But really, the biggest thing is that this is the best front seven that he has played with, period. I think last year, the edges were better than they had been, but they weren't that good. I think this year, with Jermaine Johnson getting better, with Will McDonald, with Bryce Huff getting even better, with all these guys, I think that this is the best pass rush unit that they will have had, period. And he is the best player on it. And I think that he has an opportunity to really have some pretty crazy numbers. And it's going to be in big games on a big stage. So I think that much like any of these other guys, he has just as much of opportunity as anybody.
So my big question for that real quick, love the pick, but how worried are you with him winning the award with one, other guys like you mentioned, that incredible front seven, stealing stats from him, and maybe being overshadowed a little bit by Sauce, because I think Sauce is going to make the news more often. He's going to be it's Sauce's defense. I think that's what most people are going to say. Are you worried with that at all, with stealing some spotlight from Quinnen Williams? Because otherwise, I love the pick. You saw that practice against Carolina. He had he said 11 sacks.
Yeah,
like he's gonna have a huge year.
Yeah, I think. I watched him all year last year, and I think that Sauce was a 4th overall pick, or no, 4th overall pick this year. He was a rookie. He has the charisma. He has everything. Quinnen was a 3rd overall pick in 2019, so it was a few years ago. People didn't really remember him as well, that aren't really diehard football fans. And he had some jaw-dropping plays on a weekly basis. I mean, stuff that I think that if it was in prime time, it wouldn't be that unusual of a pick.
Yeah.
What he did against the Dolphins, what he did against the Packers in particular, and what he did against the Jaguars. I mean, he had highlight plays all the time, and I just think that people are not quite as aware of him. So I don't think he'll be overshadowed. I mean, he was a first team All-Pro last year. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I think how good Sauce is for his age is remarkable, but I think Quinnen is the better player right now. So, I mean, I don't know. You might be right. You could be right that he doesn't quite get the recognition that he deserves as a result, or maybe he just doesn't win it outright. But I think that he'll
definitely deserve to be up there for sure.
I just think that what they've done with the defensive ends on this team are going to give him so many opportunities, right? Because you have a ferocious pass rush off the edge, a quarterback's immediate desires to step up to complete the pass. But Quinnen is going to be there. And honestly, one of the main reasons he didn't have more production from a statistical standpoint in the past is because they didn't have any edge rushers. They were so bad for so long that, you'd push the front of the pocket and the quarterback would just roll out. So, I don't know. We'll see. I don't want to go on about it too much longer, but I do think he has a very good chance to win it. I think they are. If I had to pick who I think will be the number one overall defense this year, I think it will be the Jets, and I think he'll be the best player on that team. Because Sauce doesn't have, and likely won't have as many interceptions based on his play style, I think he will be the preeminent stat counter for the Jets. All right. Most valuable player. So we had some crossover here. I'll start off with Kyle. He had Jalen Hurts, who I can understand being a legitimate contender for the award. He has the dual threat capability as a rusher and a passer. I wonder if they will look at it similarly to the way that they did last year with a lot of the voting, and that was how much of it is this player, and how much of it is just a completely stacked roster, because they have maybe the best offensive line in football, maybe the best receiving core. When you throw in tight end on top of that, probably the best three across the board. And then as a running back, one of those guys is likely going to emerge as a quality rusher. So the thing is, I get that, but I just wonder, is he going to separate himself as the reason that the offense runs, or is he just a very good part of it? Excuse me.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it's a large part of why he didn't get it last year, like you mentioned. That roster is just so stacked. It's kind of like, again, I'm going to make a crossover to another sport. In the NBA, when you're one of those top guys, but you have another top guy next to you, it's tough to justify you being the most valuable player, because the team could have just been just as good with the other guy. With the Eagles, it's kind of like the Niners, where obviously Jalen puts them on top because of his ability as a quarterback more than the Niners quarterbacks do. But the Niners were in a Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo. They were winning games with nobody quarterbacks, not big name guys. So it's tough to imagine the quarterback being the reason that team is winning. I think Jalen puts him in a better position than the Niners have had at quarterback. So I think it's a little bit different, but it's the same thing you were saying, that roster's it's too loaded, I think, for Jalen to stand out enough.
Yeah, I don't think it means he can't win it, but I think it makes it harder. And, if you want to look at a reason why he would, you just look at how he's improved every single year he's played football, either in a collegiate or NFL level, and how well he played in the Super Bowl last year. If you're going to if his trajectory is something to go off of, then the expectation is that he's pretty damn good.
Yeah.
So I get that. I do. But I do think it's harder when your team is that good. So who do you have as your MVP?
I have Joe Burrow as my MVP. I had him as my MVP last year. I think he was really close. I think he has been close the last couple of years. He kind of came out of nowhere as an MVP candidate a couple of years ago when he took the Bengals to the Super Bowl. He wasn't like he was like a big option going into the year and kind of emerged as the year went on. And since then, last year and heading into this year, he's clearly a favorite to be an MVP option. He is second in terms of odds for the MVP award. So that just kind of shows you what Vegas thinks of him. I think the biggest thing for me, I have the Bengals as being the number 1 seed. I think I was kind of talking about that earlier with the Chiefs maybe not hosting a playoff game this year. I think the Bengals are going to be the number 1 seed. I think he is going to be a major reason for it. And, it's not the toughest schedule in the world. They play teams like Houston and they play teams like Arizona and Tennessee and the LA. So they don't go through like the hardest schedule in the world, but still the AFC that they have to win. And I think if Joe Burrow can lead one of the best offenses in the NFL to a number 1 seed in this conference, I think it's going to be too much of a talking point to not give Joe Burrow the MVP. Like you mentioned, it seems to be the Bengals' year and it seems to be Joe Burrow's year.
Yeah, I don't fully disagree with you. So Kyron has Lamar Jackson. So all players that we have planted in the Super Bowl, right? So you have the Bengals going to the Super Bowl. Kyle has
Kyle doesn't have
a
Super Bowl player.
Yeah.
Because he has the Chiefs and Niners.
Yeah. Okay, so but I assume close. And then Kyron has the Ravens going and Lamar Jackson winning the MVP award. And I think it's possible. I think, the thing that I'm always scared of when such a big part of what makes you so special is your rushing attack, like you as a quarterback, your ability to run the ball. And I think it's an extremely valuable asset, but it's also risky. And he didn't get hurt running the ball last year, but the more you run the ball, the more hits you are most likely going to take. And as good as he has been in his career at avoiding the hit, getting out of bounds, sliding at the right time, every time you run the ball, you raise the risk a little bit more. So I'm always hesitant to really project awards when guys have been doing that for a little while, especially because I think that if you want to extend your likelihood of being successful in the season, you do have to tone that down a little bit. And I think they know that, which is why they went out and got pass catchers, aside from the fact that Lamar just was upset and wanted them. I think they know they need to throw the ball in order to make sure he stays healthy. They'll still have him run it. I don't know if it'll be at an MVP level, though, I think. And then for me, I'm with you on Joe Burrow. So I picked Patrick Mahomes last year, and I just had this feeling that the storyline is going to be no Tyreek Hill. He's still going to do incredibly well. I can't remember if I selected him to lead the league in passing or not, but I definitely picked him to be the MVP. I was like, this is the storyline that's going to win him that award. And then obviously, he gets the MVP. He goes to the Super Bowl, leads the league in passing, and the whole 9 yards. So I think just feeling wise, that's kind of where I have Joe Burrow right now. I think that last year, if it wasn't for Mahomes, he probably would have won it, because after he got hurt, banged up, he kind of changed his play style to ensure that he was getting the ball out faster, and he wasn't running around nearly as much. More specific situations, he'd go for it. So I think that he's going to play that way the entire year. I think he's going to be very turnover averse. I think he's going to will his team to wins. And I think that he just has the cachet, the swagger, everything that you want, that people are going to be putting him in that slot. I think they're going to say, this is the 2023 MVP. So even if he doesn't lead the league in passing, if that's Justin Herbert, I just think from an overall perspective, he is going to be the most valuable player in the league this year. Any thoughts on Lamar Jackson or Joe Burrow before we pick the game for tonight and call it a day?
No, I think you covered most of it. I am with you on the Lamar Jackson piece. It scares me to do a season prediction on a guy who is at risk of missing time because of the way he plays. So I was right there with you on Lamar, and obviously we covered the Joe Burrow part. It seems to be his time.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that is it for all of our predictions. We are just going to pick the game tonight. I don't have Kyle's pick here with me right now, but we'll make sure we get it before the game starts. It is the Detroit Lions visiting the defending Super Bowl champions, Kansas City Chiefs, with the Chiefs favored by 6.5. So we can make this quick. Brison, who do you have for the game tonight?
I have the Lions covering the spread at 6.5. I don't know if they win the game because it's still Mahomes and Reed, and they're incredible week one, and they're one of the best teams early on in the season every year. But I think this Lions roster is improved enough to at least compete with the Chiefs. I think this offense, with how many weapons it has, is good enough to go toe-to-toe this early on in the season with the Chiefs. The possibility of not having Travis Kelce makes this a little bit better for me. That's the scary part. We don't know the word on him yet. Probably no Chris Jones either, which helps out a lot. Again, don't know if I love them to win the game, but I don't see the Chiefs winning by a touchdown and more.
Yeah. So I have the same pick as you. I have the Lions by 6, covering 6.5, I should say, because I don't expect them to win. I clearly expect the Chiefs to win, but I think 6.5 is just a little too large to be pretty much guaranteed without Chris Jones and very possibly without Travis Kelce. And even if so, again, like you said, not full health. So I think they win. I think they will find a way. I think they will have trick plays. I think they will do what they need to do to win the game. But I think without those 2 stars, or at least 2 stars full health, it's a little bit too much. 6.5 for me. You have to win by a full touchdown, which might well happen. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
But even though I trust them to win, I'm going to take the numbers in this one and just say that it's closer than that. So, all right. That's it. Long show, but it always is when we do the season predictions. Glad we got this done. I wanted to get all of my thoughts and predictions on the record somewhere before we officially started the season. So despite much adjusting of the schedule, we got it done. So appreciate you
made it.
Doing that. Kyle will be back on with us, like I said, every Sunday, starting this Sunday, to pick all of the games against the spread on Sunday. And you guys always throw out a couple of other bets that you like, whether it be yardage, points, whatever the case might be. So we'll throw those in there as well. And you can find me on Twitter at TheMaxDean. You can find Brison at Brison Owens 16. You can find Kyle at Kyle _ Nishida.
I think that's correct.
You can also find Defiant Takes Football at Defiant Takes on all social media outlets. You can check out all of our written work over at defianttakesfootball.com, which will really be ramping up as the season kicks off. And of course, we are live. Wow, the schedule's been a little bit off, so I don't want to commit to anything too deeply right now, but we will be live every Sunday. That will not be on the podcast feed because by the time we finish recording that and putting it live, it's kind of too late for it to really be viable as a podcast episode, but it'll be live on the channel. And then we'll also have podcast episodes up for other content throughout the season. So appreciate you, Brison. Have a good one, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all very soon.